We are live. Excuse me, Kathy, I think you're muted.
Okay, we'll try that again. Okay, good evening and welcome to a virtual special meeting of the City of Dublin Architectural Review Board. The Ohio legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to have virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government. For the present time, we are holding our meetings online and live streaming those meetings on YouTube. You can access the live stream on the city's website. The meeting procedure for each case this evening will begin with a staff presentation, followed by public comment prior to board review and discussion. No vote will be taken on this evening's agenda. To submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. Those questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. We want to accommodate public participation to the greatest extent possible and welcome your comments on cases. Please use a valid name and address when submitting your comments, and please refrain from making any inappropriate comments. This is not a perfect system. We will do our best in these difficult times and we appreciate your patience. Now, if you would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Is there a flag? All right, we'll go ahead and say it without a flag. Okay, here we go. All right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. All right. Would you take the roll call, please?
Mr. Kanaki?
Here.
Mr. Cotter?
Here.
Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Ms. Cram?
Here.
Ms. Bryan?
Here. And I'd like a motion to accept the documents into record.
I'll move
I'll
to
move
accept
to-
the document.
Okay. Can I get a
I'll
second?
second.
Okay.
One of us will do it.
All right, great. Thank you.
Ms. Cram?
Yes.
Mr. Kanaki?
Yes.
Mr. Cotter?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Ms. Bryan?
Yes. Thank you. The Architectural Review Board is responsible for review of construction and modifications or alterations to any site in the review district or area subject to architectural review under the provision of Zoning Code 153.177. The board has the responsibility to review and make future recommendations on the following two administrative requests. I will read both agenda items into the record. Number one, Historic Dublin Zoning Code Amendment 19-007 ADMC. This application is a request for feedback and recommendation, no vote, of revisions for the proposed zoning district modifications, historic Dublin boundary changes, amendments to the zoning code, and revisions to Appendix G under the provision of Zoning Code Section 153.232 and 153.234. The second item is Historic Dublin Design Guidelines 18-037 ADMC. This application is a request for feedback and recommendations, no vote, for the comprehensive updates to the historic Dublin design guidelines to revise design recommendations and address discrepancies with zoning code requirements. First item, the first speaker will be Greg Dale. He's going to provide us with the case background. Greg?
Thank you, members of the board. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll actually, Jenny and I may be tag teaming this a little bit. So Jenny, you can jump in. What we'd like to do are 2 or 3 different things. First of all, let me explain. I'm with McBride Dale Clarion, and we are the planning and zoning consultant that has been working with the city on this project. And we've worked with the city on a number of other related projects also. So it's always a pleasure to be working with Dublin and your great planning staff. So what we want to do, we want to take just a minute and describe how we got to this point, because this has been a long, thorough road to get to where we are. And then what I propose to do is just hit some of the highlights of what we're dealing with in terms of the changes to the 2 documents. So just everybody's clear, we have 2 things in front of us. And I think the idea is to take those together. I know they're separate agenda items, but I think in terms of our presentation, at least, we'll take those together. Those 2 being the changes to the actual land use regulations that are part of the zoning code that apply to the historic districts and the historic district guidelines. And it's important to understand that those are 2 related but different things. The first one, of course, is the law. That is part of the regulations of the city of Dublin, and the second are the guidelines. And as you'll hear me talk about as we go forward here, one of the things that we try to do is to make the relationship between those 2 documents a little bit more clear and tighter, so that the guidelines, while they exist outside of the code of ordinances, outside of the city's regulations, they do mean something. They're more than just, more than just ideas. They are important in amplifying the regulations, and we'll try to talk about that a little bit more as we go. Jenny, did you want to summarize the steps that we've gotten to get here? Do you want me to go ahead and do that?
I'll let you go ahead and do that if you're comfortable doing that.
Okay, yeah, and Jenny can help me out. So this is a process that's actually been going on for just about 2 years now. That started with the creation of a stakeholders committee, and that stakeholder committee, as its name implies, had representatives from different interests in the historic district, property owners, businesses, other leaders. Staff put together a list of all the events that we had, and it's a pretty remarkable effort by the city to be thorough, to engage virtually everyone that wanted to be engaged. So let me just hit it by the numbers here for a second. So first of all, we had 4 stakeholder meetings as we went through the process. Those were mainly in 2018. There were 6 different public events, including open houses, including what were called office hours, where people could drop in and meet with staff at times when folks were available to do that. And we also had an open house. One of the things that we did, I think, that was most interesting in this process from a public participation standpoint, and this goes directly to the guidelines that we'll be talking about. We spent a lot of time working with citizens and people who are interested in the historic area and trying to understand what the underlying goals were that were trying to be achieved by these guidelines and regulations. And what I mean by that is, if you think in terms of a continuum, and all of you obviously know this area, and you've probably also visited other areas, in terms of understanding what people want to see in terms of this spectrum between kind of pure historic preservation and things that replicate the historic character versus more creative or bolder, innovative architectural ideas in historic districts. And you've probably seen both of these in different places that you visited. So we kind of set up this visual preference survey for citizens to take. And it was really very interesting and helpful in helping us, I think, get to the point where what we ended up with is a pretty good representation of what we think the consensus of the community is. So I just wanted you to understand that that public involvement process went pretty deep. This has been before this actual Architectural Review Board on 7 different meetings in the past. This is your 8th meeting to talk about this. It's been reviewed with the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's been reviewed with the Community Development Committee, and it's been reviewed with Council as a whole. And each one of those has resulted in different changes and edits and ideas that have been incorporated into this. So that's about 20 different points where either public or leadership or stakeholders have been able to engage in this. So it's a pretty extensive process. We think we're at a point where we have incorporated either incorporated all of the best ideas or have worked with the board in the past to explain where that didn't necessarily happen. But let me just hit some highlights if I could, Ms. Bryan, if that's okay. I'll just kind of hit some high points of what you have before you. Again, remember we have 2 different things. We have the regulations and the guidelines. In terms of the regulations, one of the things in terms of the map of the districts, there are a series of district changes that are being proposed that were actually I don't know if the word directed. The guidance was provided by City Council to make those changes, and we can talk about those if you want. But one of the things that we did is we've added language in a number of places between the regulations and the guidelines to strengthen the tie between those two. And as I mentioned earlier, to give the guidelines a more sense of teeth, right? They're not regulations, but they're more than just ideas that should be considered. They're more explicitly linked to the regulations. There was talk about the hotel, concept of hotel, and basically it was eliminated in the historic South area. It remains in the core area, but we wrote some specific standards to deal with hotels. Multifamily was addressed. It was changed to be limited to 2-family in the historic South and in the core. We spent a lot of time working with this board and with the community on the development standards, meaning things like dimensions and lot coverage and so forth. And we think we've settled on a rear yard setback, which was a real point of discussion throughout the process, which is based on a percentage with a not to exceed regulation that you may have seen. Overall, we've also tried to reconcile the regulations with the standards. There were places where if you can understand the idea that the regulation should be as objective and non-discretionary as possible, with the discretion residing mostly in the design guidelines, in the historic guidelines. So just as an example, not to belabor this point, but stoops and balconies, the board wanted those to be dealt with as regulations, and canopies and awnings we wanted to be dealt with as guidelines. And again, not that those are critical issues. Those are just 2 examples of how we kind of sorted those between the 2. Added stronger language to talk about the importance of the context to the regulations. We added a process whereby if someone disagrees with a determination of the significance of a contributing property, they have the ability to challenge that through the waiver process. We improved, we think, significantly improved and strengthened the demolition standards in the regulations. So those are the kinds of things. There's a number of other details in the regulations that were addressed. In terms of the guidelines, a couple of things that were emphasized there. One of them was just, we started to use the term early on in the process, a word diet. There were a lot of editorial kinds of language in the design guidelines that we think made them hard to use. So we just simplified some of that and tried to put it a little bit more as a user-friendly checklist for the board to be able to use. Provided some more guidance on the discretionary nature of the guidelines. In other words, what it means when we use words like should and are encouraged and discouraged, and tried to provide some more definition of that. Expanded the guidelines for new construction, with new construction in the district. Revisited and expand the explanation for the use of contemporary modern materials. When your guidelines were written, the concept of alternative materials were things like aluminum siding, but we all know that there are a lot of products out there now that are very, very good quality products that have become increasingly accepted by the historic preservation community, things like Trex on decks and those sorts of things. One of the comments that came up, I think, from this board was the importance of the cultural landscape. So we created some more context language for the cultural landscape and the ability to consider that in the regulations. And then we also, one of the other things we did, the board may recall that there were discussion about the role of the Secretary of the Interior standards. And while we don't want to incorporate all of the Secretary of the Interior standards explicitly as your regulations, there's some 250 pages of Secretary of the Interior standards. We did strengthen that relationship and encourage people to use the Secretary of the Interior standards, particularly on things like maintenance and good historic preservation maintenance, and to refer to those and indicate that these regulations are consistent with those more detailed Secretary of the Interior standards. So those, I think, are the highlights of what we've done and what you had before you. This was all stuff that evolved over these 2 years and all of these different meetings. So Jenny, did I miss any big issues that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. I think you definitely hit the high points of feedback we've received over the past couple of years and more recent months, and really a lot of discussion that we've had with all the board members and making sure, and Planning and Zoning Commission, just to make sure we're hitting all those points. I think that's a great summary. Thanks, Greg.
Good, thank you. So Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you for any questions or discussion.
Thank you. Does since three of you weren't here when this whole process started, do you have any questions for Greg or for Jenny at this point?
No, I'm pretty good.
Okay.
I don't know if we get into some more details, but I do have some questions about how we got a lot of sticky notes in here, just because trying to read the minutes of the meetings from the past to now was a bit hard to connect them all. But I don't know if we'll get into them in a little more detail, just clarity about how we got from A to B. I don't know that I have many questions, but just to help clarify some things.
Something specific or in general?
Well, and some of them are more specific. So, okay. I mean, generally, I think generally it looks okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So we've kind of,
excuse me, Kathy, I will have a lot of specific questions. So when the time comes to start going through the documents. Okay.
Okay. I'm sure we all do to some extent. So we sort of covered the case background, the summary of input and revisions, code guideline and usage overview. Anything to add to that? Greg, I think you did a really nice job of summarizing everything.
Good, thank you. No, as far as I'm concerned, we're ready to jump into the document.
All right, well then we're going to transition to the board review and discussion portion of our meeting. At this point, I'd like to sort of start at the beginning and work our way through, starting with the code, because I think that of the two, that one probably has the most changes. So I don't know that I don't want to be tedious with this, but I think we will just kind of go through page by page. All right. So does everybody have their copy of their code available? Anything on page 1? We're at 153.002 under definitions, applicability, and zoning districts.
I had
Yeah.
one thing. First of all, the definition for architectural style, use the term architectural style. You should never use the term you're trying to define. So we need to redefine that word. And there was a reference to an appendix F, which we didn't have, or at least I didn't have in my stuff. So I don't know what that is. But other than that,
Jenny or Greg, can you give us any idea what Appendix F was?
Yes, and I apologize that that's not in there. Appendix F is a map in the zoning code of the historic district.
oh, okay.
It's just the boundaries, but we'll make sure that's included moving forward. So apologies for that.
Okay. So I do, since we're kind of talking about the district, can you give us some insight into why council decided to take out Bridge Street Z1 and 2?
So, yeah, the discussion that we had when we were kicking this off initially and removing, and council's direction to remove the historic district from the Bridge Street district was, and we had a lot of discussion about what those boundaries would be, how we would, what properties continue to be included, should those boundaries be modified. And the direction at that time was to remove those particular properties from the district. There was a lot of concern from council that the way those properties have redeveloped really don't define the character of the historic district that they would like to see going forward. So concerns with people pointing to those as properties and development projects that are within the district, and then using that as an opportunity to point to those and say, well, this is within the district and these were approved and permitted, thus me, new developer, should be granted those same allowances for redevelopment. So I think their concern was precedent setting behind that.
But we've already got that in the residential, so I think that argument isn't real valid for the removal of it.
Okay.
We've already got precedents set. I'm looking out my window at a couple of precedents. So what do the rest of you think about Bridge Street Z1 and 2? That would be taken out of our purview and under Plan P&Z?
I agree. I personally agree with it being taken out. I think the library and the Bridge Street stuff do not contribute any way to the historic district. They, in my opinion, are completely different and shouldn't be used as any example for anything in the historic district. So they would still fall under the preview of Planning and Zoning Commission.
Yes.
So they're still going to be regulated. But I don't think nothing they do on those properties is going to be able to comply with any of the regulations for the historic district.
Okay. What do the rest of you think?
I completely agree. I mean, the only other difference or add-on would be what's covered, which is materials. Beyond building materials, the library obviously doesn't look anything historic whatsoever, as it really shouldn't. So, it stands on its own as it rightfully should at this point, without creating history.
Okay.
I questioned this twice before. The former chair of this committee questioned this because if you compare the front side and the back side of that building, the front side, while you can argue with its success, the front side of the building is nowhere like the back because it attempted to relate in a heavy-handed way to the verticality and the context of the buildings in the district. So being in the district actually helped reduce the scale of those buildings and gave them a different quality that compared to the building in the back. So you probably would have seen if you look at the building in the back, you see greater similarities between that and the library than other buildings in the district. The second reason, and members of the council have complained about the quality of some of the commercial buildings in the area. An opportunity for architectural review for some of the changes would be beneficial. Whether people like that or not, that's a question. But I think there is a benefit to having oversight on that area. But I have a feeling this is maybe a done deal.
Well, I know, but I agree with you, Gary, and it's because it has been under the historic district that we haven't seen probably more blatant examples of modernistic, non-historical. We've been able to rein them in a little bit. That takes that totally away from us, and it will then be what it will be.
And just for me becoming new, I tend to agree with Gary and Kathleen. It kind of enters into the historic district, and just the first glance for me, it seems strange. You'll carve it out and have it in essentially being across the river. And just when I first read that, it struck me as a bit strange. I didn't know the background about how Architectural Review looked at things in the past, but somehow you can see that the massing and the scaling could be different if you view it with the lens of looking at it from a perspective of being across the river. So
Yeah.
I tend to agree that when I read it, it seems strange that you're going to carve out, however many feet that is of frontage that you'd carve out of that as it enters into the historic district. So I'm not sure it seems like it should be in. I don't have a strong opinion, but it seems strange that it's out.
Well, my concern if it's out is that you're going to have a very definite between historic and then a very definite divide to whatever Bridge Street is going to look like. Instead, we've got a more gradual look that I think is more compatible to what we want. So I don't know, Jenny, we can talk about process in a little bit, but if some of us aren't in agreement with this, what can we do about that?
Well, wouldn't some of that go into planning and zoning and not necessarily the ARB? Just,
Well,
they could, planning and zoning could reduce scale through their own code.
Well, but then it would be it would be Bridge Street code, which is different from historic Dublin code.
Right.
And it's probably much more lenient.
That could be, it just seems like something that maybe that should be in that code. Maybe it is too lenient. Maybe it, doesn't necessarily belong in the old part of the city code.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see the Bridge Street code change. It's been 2 years to get the historic district changed.
Sure.
Okay, well, I just wanted to see where everybody was at. All right, and on page 2 on the code, any questions, comments?
I only had a question about what, as page 2 funnels into the chart on page 4, and just trying to understand a bit how the P's and the T, how everything came there. Did it come from an original? Is this kind of an original document, or did we try to update? Because some of them just look strange.
Yeah. And
yeah, and I can provide a little background if you want. So we did try to retain the format of the Bridge Street Code just for continuity's purposes, and probably our initial draft had more uses in here now than where we currently are, but we really have tried to, except again for like hotels and some of the school pieces and some of the things that are marked out of here. So the markup version, also for clarity, is what has changed from the last time. This was reviewed by ARB and Planning Commission. So this is not a red line version of existing code now, because it would be really hard to read given the amount of changes that we've made. So this, again, really wanting to try to maintain to the extent possible the permitted uses so that existing businesses and residents have a semblance of what's currently permitted. So that's where those come in. So the P is permitted, T is a sort of a time limited, which I don't think we have. Those are really more under the accessory uses. So there's like a time frame associated with that. If there's ones that are like a P/S/C, if maybe that's what you're getting at. So it's permitted in some instances with then a potential limitation of the size. And if they wanted something greater than that size, then they would be required to get a conditional use approval to permit that. So it's,
because some of mine were just, because some were just, like thinking about, you could have a school and, and so, or a daycare center and some of the residents. It was just, I didn't know if we're, okay, so you were trying to keep the character of what it was there before, so we didn't have to have some sort of change if somebody was already had an existing,
right.
Let's say something existing.
Non-conforming, right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And really looking at practically speaking. So, I mean, you'll notice that elementary, middle school in the original code was permitted. We've now struck that out other than the public district. So meaning in historic residential, that's not appropriate in this instance, again, largely because these lots are pretty small, and where would you even fit a middle school or an elementary school? Same with South and Core.
On that same note, Jenny, why then shouldn't we strike out high school? Because it's still showing as permitted.
We can do that.
So
that makes sense.
It would make sense if we eliminated elementary and middle school from Core and South. We also need to eliminate the high school.
Okay.
Since we don't have a map, is North Riverview Street considered core or residential?
Yes, that is historic core, as far as I recall.
What did you say, North Street?
North Riverview Street, so it's
Riverview.
Oh, North
those
Riverview Street.
6 properties on the north side.
So you need then to
It's just
put a permitted under single family dwelling, because right now it's blank.
Well, again, so this is also goes to the above section that if you have an existing use, so if residential exists there now, you would be able to retain your existing uses. I mean, we can definitely add that. I think it was intentional that if somebody wanted to redevelop it as commercial, they could. But if we wanted to retain that,
I think we need to have a P there. A
I'm sorry,
permitted.
catch me up. You're talking about in the historic core,
yes, that single family dwelling should be permitted.
it'd be permitted?
Because we have North Riverview, we have the houses on North Riverview, and I think that needs to be protected.
But they would, I think, and that's fine if that's the sense of the board. That would allow new single family then to occur. The ones that are there would be legally non-conforming. But if you want to allow new single family in the historic core, we would add the P there.
And I think the issue would be, you would be allowing single family on other historic core zoned properties. So in a more commercial area, you would be then permitting it. So that's why the existing uses provision is there. So you could keep your existing residential, even if they wanted to demolish those houses and rebuild. I'm not suggesting we want that, but in a scenario, you could demolish that and continue to keep residential there. We could
Okay.
definitely
So
look at how.
it doesn't prevent the residential where there is residential. What it prevents is residential where there's now commercial.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
What are you guys okay with that? Okay. So we're on we'll go to page 4, and we're on the first chart. 153.172A. Any questions, comments, concerns on that?
I would say my concern is I personally don't think, I know this has been discussed a lot, but I disagree with allowing hotels. But that is my personal opinion.
I agree.
I just don't think it's going to be possible to build a hotel anywhere in the historic district and the scale and mass and size work.
Okay, and we had a lot of discussion at Planning Commission about that too, and with the board of, let's take a stab at writing some use specific standards. And if you think that addresses your concerns and works, then we keep it. If not, we can eliminate it. So if that's, in the end, we can hear from everybody else, but that is an option.
My opinion would be to eliminate it.
Just for reference for the board, I'm not arguing one way or the other. I don't really have a strong opinion, but if you look at page 8, a few pages back, you'll see the new standards that were added in response to the board's concerns about that question. So when it says hotels with those conditions, those are the conditions that would apply. And again, I'm not arguing for or against.
Sure.
I honestly don't have an opinion on this. Really.
I still think even 50 rooms and you add all the other stuff, that's a pretty sizable building.
It's huge compared to anything else in the district.
Yeah.
And my concern was also because if you start then cross-referencing some of these uses to the parking requirements,
Exactly.
somehow you really get it. For me, I was having a hard time reconciling 50 rooms, and it was 1 per room. I forget the part. I have to go back and look at the parking, but
Yeah.
somehow I was having a hard time reconciling how that could even work.
It would probably be hard to make a hotel work there.
Right.
An easy way to judge this is last October, we had a proposal for a 126 room hotel. It was essentially 3 stories above grade. The 4th story was partially above grade. If you even go back and look at what was proposed, and it was a very detailed presentation, and you think about dividing that roughly in half, it's still, like Amy said, it's still a huge building. So when you read the way you've made the code more context dependent, it's hard to see how something that large could fit into these other parts of the code that call for something context dependent.
So, Sean, what do you think?
For me, the way it's written there, 50, I can't imagine how you could make, I don't know what it would smaller would be, but 50 for me is too big. Certainly
Yeah.
it's too big.
Frank?
Just everybody know, I'm sorry, let me just say this. I'm not trying to influence this. We looked at a lot of conditions on hotels in historic districts. And believe it or not, 50 was actually at the low end of what
Yeah.
you, so.
Yeah.
Again, not
No,
arguing.
I can
I
see
was
bed
gonna say,
and
no, I think it should be
breakfast.
eliminated as well.
I'm sorry, Frank, what?
I'm in agreement with you. I think it just should be eliminated as well. So, plus
Okay.
if you have a hotel, you end up with a party as well, and all those cars coming in.
Well, and a bed and breakfast is permitted, and that
Yeah.
that would work. It's
Mhm.
something small.
That's a different,
That's different. That I'm okay with that, but hotel, I think it's just I don't see how it could possibly work.
So Jenny, we're all, I know we're not voting, but we all feel pretty strongly about not having a hotel in historic core.
But just is bed and breakfast called out in here? Just how big those are? Is it? I don't remember seeing.
Yeah, bed and breakfast is a couple, it's permitted,
Which,
but it doesn't have any details, I don't believe.
Well,
okay, there's nothing in the detail area just to say how big or what it would be.
No.
If you look
I
on
don't see
page
that.
8, right above the hotel conditions, you'll see what,
Oh, there it is.
that's what exists now.
Okay.
It's
okay.
not much, but that's the way it is right now.
No more than 8 guests are permitted, so that's pretty small.
More than 8 guest units. Okay. Nice. Okay.
Okay. Anything else on the,
I only had one more question. If we're moving on to the next thing, I only had, because I was just one other one that just caught my eye was artisan production, because
Me too.
it doesn't define what that means, and I just want to make sure that we. And an artisan can be making a lot of stuff, right?
I agree with you. I mean, we could have a blacksmith forge, so I would like
Yeah.
this conditional use or specific standards there. I
Because
agree.
That's in your current code, right? That exists beyond the historic district, I think, doesn't it?
I think it is proposed in the updated version. I was looking at our current zoning definitions and I don't see one, but I do recall some detailed discussion about that. So let us look
Yeah.
into what those
Okay.
permissions are and provide that definition for you to all review and maybe some uses.
Okay.
Yeah, just to make sure we don't get somebody who's obnoxious, and then you'll be fighting whatever
Right,
that
a
could be
nuisance,
inside of
sure.
it. Yeah, a nuisance issue that comes
Yep.
up.
Okay.
Yeah. And then maybe just sorry that I have some since I missed some
No,
of this. And
that's
some
why
of them
we're
was
doing this, yeah.
and some of them were just for me on the dwelling, live, and work. So I'm going back over to page 4, where in historic residential you have single family, you don't have live and work. But I was just wondering the reason it was taken out. Was there a in the thought process that was taken out? I mean, it's in historic South. I mean, it's more. I know there's more commercial things going on. It was just taken out there just to eliminate parking. Just what was the reason it was? There's no P in historic residential for dwelling, live, and work. Just for some clarity for me.
My guess is that's currently not permitted in the code, and that would be the sort of a commercial use in a residential area and wanting to really try to retain
Okay.
residential within that historic residential area.
Okay.
Well, that, I believe we have that already.
Home occupations are permitted. I think the potential level of intensity for live work could be a little bit different.
Okay.
In
Okay.
this
The
format.
live work is
Had-
kind of a step up from a home occupation because it
Yeah.
does actually have non-resident employees allowed.
I see. Okay.
Okay. That's good. So we're not restricting someone's ability to make a living in their home if they're selling stuff on eBay or they're
No,
an
you can
accountant
still do
working.
that.
Okay.
That's
Clear.
handled elsewhere in the code, right? The live work means you're having people come there, you have staff on site, it's more of a commercial component to it.
Okay.
I only had one other question on that line of different things. So as an accessory use, we have accessory dwellings. I'm assuming that means a second, like maybe an in-law suite or something like, a separate house for your in-laws. Why wouldn't we allow that in the historic residential? Like if they put a room over their detached garage or something.
Again, the existing code didn't permit that, so we were really trying to stick with what's,
Oh, okay.
but I'm not saying we couldn't, we just tried to retain things the way they were unless we knew we had examples or previous discussions. I'm
So
not-
the existing code specifically does not allow that anywhere in the historic district? And we're now incorporating it into certain sections, or it didn't allow it just in the residential area?
Correct, the second part. So it's permitted elsewhere in the historic district and throughout
Now.
Wood Street, just not in the historic residential.
For now, okay.
Okay. Any other comments, questions on the charts through top of page 7? Okay, we're under, on page 7, use specific standards. Anything on page 7? We can move over to 8, and there's the hotel.
We'll remove that.
Okay.
And just on bed and breakfast, there's nothing, I mean, if we're thinking about just, I don't know what it looks like anywhere else, but it says, we just said it was 8.
Mhm.
I have no context what that means, so I don't know if that's a good number. And so for me, on that one, I don't have any context if that's good or bad. Doesn't seem like very many, but.
No, yeah. I know there are houses around here who could easily fit 8 people. Some have been built to look like they could be B&Bs.
And Jenny, is that, are B&Bs allowed I mean, there are other places in the city that they're allowed?
Honestly, I believe in the zoning code, this is probably, the historic district is probably the only place that's really allowed unless a plan district allows it, because they're pretty rare. I would think most residential areas would not permit that just from that sort of nuisance feel to it.
Isn't there a bed and breakfast just further down on Dublin Road, or is that in the township?
I do recall there being one down there, but I don't.
There's one
There's
about a half a
Yeah.
mile south of the historic district.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I mean, again, if you all wanted to, currently it's only permitted in core and south and not residential. So
Okay. I appreciate the changes I've seen throughout this, removing adjacent and adding the word surrounding. I think that's a better choice. Okay, Sean, did you have something?
No, I was just, I don't know if from just playing just to see if that, I don't know if we're limiting something on bed and breakfast or if we're letting too much. So I don't have a.
I mean, we can look into it and see what a reasonable number is. That's very
Alright.
easy for us to
Yeah.
look into.
Because then parking and other things are not an issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything on page 9? Did anybody have concerns on the square footage for any of these? Under number 2, on page 9, top, 5,000 square foot is the size of the gross floor area for eating and drinking. And then retail, 10,000 square feet.
well, as long as the applicant understands that they're not guaranteed 5,000 square feet. I mean, it still has to be appropriate size and massing and all the other criteria. If you can get that big of square footage and still meet all the other stuff, then it's okay. I think it's going to be pretty hard to build 5,000 square feet within the height and mass and all the other requirements.
I agree. I thought those numbers were a little big. Jenny, can we add some more verbiage in here that talks about, in keeping with the surrounding area so that we don't have something that sticks out?
We can look at that. I know you asked Jenny, but I know that discussion came up and we did add language in there, and I don't remember where it is, but in general, the ability to use the guidelines to essentially reduce the intensity of what would otherwise be permitted by the code. So the board already has that ability to say, it says 5,000 square feet, but here are other guidelines and other standards that cause us to want to reduce this to 4,000.
Yeah, I just, I don't want to rely on the guidelines for people who are trying to push the envelope, because the code is the law, the guidelines are suggestions, so.
Would there be something stopping somebody from buying 2 lots together?
Yeah,
And that would even give them more mass to, take up.
well, that was the plan for the hotel.
Right. Combining 2 lots, make it one parcel number, then all of a sudden your square footage you could take over on that parcel would be pretty big
Right.
if money's no option.
But even if you did that, at least as the code is currently written, even if you had 2 parcels, we're saying 3,500 or 5,000, depending on your situation, would be the maximum. So, but I get where you're saying. I mean, we can look at how that's worded. So
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the
okay.
square footage.
Could it be as simple as something like as designed in accordance with the design, or as built in accordance with the design guidelines, eating and drinking established shall not exceed 3,500 square feet or whatever, like just reference that, hey, reminder, you still have to meet these other things.
What do you think about that, Greg?
Aren't they all the issues that are laid out in table 153, 173A? I mean, which regardless of how big, that's laying out your coverage and your height, and that's going to limit the building size. And whether it's 5 lots or 5 lots grouped or 5 individual lots, the maximum size will be the same. So as long as people know that they're still working under this table, I think you're covered. Maybe it's just language referring to that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, and on page 10, anything on page
So
10?
before we leave, did we decide not to add any language to those sections then, or?
I would like to see some,
Either reference the table or
Yeah.
reference that they have to meet other guidelines and other sections of the code, that it's not somehow remind them it's not a straight up number. If you can do that succinctly and not make it long and cumbersome, and
right.
that would
To
be
me, I'm
helpful.
wondering if it's more up at the beginning part before the chart, because it's not only specific. I guess I could see this not being only specific to eating and drinking, right? This could be applicable to all of them. So maybe under that larger 153, 172 uses part, we could add something in there that refers to that. I think that would cover us even
that
a
would
little
be
more
good.
so. Okay.
That would be good. Greg, you look like you're sitting in the dark.
Yeah, I know. If I lean back,
Well, then we see you better.
maybe I can move my computer back a little bit.
Okay. There you go.
I see that. I keep going. Dark. Maybe
All
that's
right.
because I'm leaning over into my book and then I get dark there. I know.
Yeah. Page 10. Page 11. I have a question on page 11 under outdoor dining and seating, the use of outdoor speakers. I'm not sure what the provision on the code is.
That's the noise ordinance provision.
And what does it say? Do you know? Is it around?
I'm sure it's that you're not, I'd have to look it up specifically, but my guess is it's saying that you're not to be negatively impacting your neighbors to a certain
That's
extent.
subjective. Since I'm sitting in my house at times and I can hear the music at Bridge
From
Park.
Bridge Park, yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I just didn't know what that was. And I think that on number 5, the speakers, speaking of noise, can you all hear the lawnmower? Jeez. On the speakers, one of the things that we talked about and the Pearl did, and I think it's a really positive thing. We directed them to put the speakers on the ground facing not out towards the river, but in. And that way everybody gets to enjoy the music on their porch. Not everybody has to listen to it. So I don't know if we can be more specific on number 5.
We can, what would your recommendation be for that?
Well, I guess as long as it says, I think the direct the sound, I think that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, and I'm looking at too, because I'm trying to remind myself if, outdoor, sorry, hold on a second. Trying to look at the use specific standards to see.
That's Dana's lawnmower, by the way.
Okay, never mind. Okay,
That's Dana's lawnmower.
we'll blame him then. Okay.
And then number 6, I'd really like to see midnight changed to
When?
under number 6
After
after
the number you were suggesting, sorry.
After-
Change it to what time?
change midnight to 11.
11.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Jenny, is that somewhere else in the city code that, do we have NORS ordinance that start at 11 or 12? Is there anything in there about?
That NORS ordinance would have hours of operation, but we put these specific, like 5 and 6 are added to help quantify that a little bit better. So, I mean, these were recommended by staff with, ARB and Planning Commission and previous cases that we've seen, and trying to make sure that we're meeting the expectations and previous approvals. So I don't know if there's any magic reason to midnight. I can look into that and see if that causes any.
If there's not, I mean, there are people who have to get up and go to work, who have children who have to go to school, and they're trying to put them to bed. And I mean, noise is just ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we can look at that.
Thank you. Okay, page 12, anything?
I only just had one question about renewable energy equipment in like a solar panel that's ground, let's say ground mounted on B, 2J, 2B. Does that count as slot coverage? I mean, can you fill your whole backyard with a solar panel?
That would be a pretty sight.
Because, and I don't know what it says in other renewable things, but I don't know. Looks like it could look kind of strange if you just had your somehow filled all your open space with the.
I have an acre I could fill.
Yeah.
I have a wide, nice acre field. I'll just fill the whole thing with solar panels.
Make a little side money.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I can charge it back to the city. You guys can run Sciota Park with it.
There you go. So I don't believe this counts as lot coverage. I'd have to look at that requirement and see what that looks like.
I don't know off the top of my head either.
Yeah.
We have to look at that.
Okay. Good question. We can.
It's an accessory use. So
yeah.
To the extent other accessory uses like sheds would count as lot coverage, it probably would.
I mean, they would. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay.
Okay. So renewable energy equipment somehow where it's in here is a accessory permitted use, then somehow it would count.
Yeah, let us look at that though. Confirm.
Okay.
That.
Okay. All right, page 13. I like the changes. Thank you very much.
I have just a general question of how you got to the 45% for the historic residential.
So we had I'll start maybe and then others can chime in. So we had a really detailed conversation on, I think, multiple occasions about what's the magic number here, given proposals we've seen. And we did a lot of research on staff side of existing residential and what does that lot coverage number look like?
And what is that?
I know, I knew you were going to ask me that as soon as I said that. I can look and see. 45 is more in line, and I think even less than our current code allows. But given the smaller lot size, oh, Gary's got it. What does it say, Gary?
All right, you did this, and I'm going to comment on some things later in here.
Okay.
But you did this back in October 16th of last year.
No wonder I can't remember. Okay.
And you provided this to the board. So you noted that you have 48 properties, 23 are 20% or below. 12 are between 30 and 39. And then you have 11 between 40 and 49, and 2 exceed 50%. So I could kind of see personally where you came from based on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was not very consistent, I think, as now that we're talking about. I do recall that it was very much on all ends of the spectrum. So trying to make sure we have some allowances. But again, I mean, that's where we are. We could definitely, that's why we're here to talk about it if you think it should be something different.
What is it everywhere else in the city in general residential?
45%.
It's 45 elsewhere in the city?
Yeah, and I think I'm looking back at the minutes from the November meeting where this was discussed. Yeah, it for some reason it was 50% here in the historic district, even though elsewhere in the residential district it's 45.
I think that's how we arrived at 45 is, some wanted to take it lower than that, but at
You're
least
right.
that was where the rest of the city was.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
I don't think this is going to have much impact. I think, and I've said this before, and nobody listens to me. Other communities are regulating building size. So they have two numbers. They have the development cover, because right now there's an enormous difference between a house that builds to 35% of their property still could fit under the 45, and a house that's down at 20. And if you're concerned about the open space that you see, you don't see the plane of pavement or asphalt. What you see is buildings. So I think the code, particularly in the historic district, and other communities in Central Ohio are doing it, should regulate building cover as well as overall cover. Because then I think you could get homes that have had additions to them and new construction closer together in terms of their mass on the site. But like I said, nobody listens to me, so I'll say it again.
There's still time, Carrie.
Okay.
So would you propose a maximum building size? Do you have a number in mind that you want to put out there?
Well, I'll give you, one community uses 29%. And this is South Arlington on lots. It's a community, the whole community's in the National Register. On lots that are smaller than the lots that we have, much smaller than the lots that we have, they're using 29% for building cover. Bexley, in some of their smaller lots, they have a slightly higher number for their percentage of building cover. But you can build something pretty big at 30%.
Maybe I just one quick, because I mean, if I'm looking at historic South, the maximum building footprint is 1,800 square feet. I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to tell me. Sorry, I'm just not sure I understand.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is, okay, where we have maximum lot coverage, okay?
Yeah,
So maximum lot coverage, we're saying that 45% of your property can be covered with buildings, pavement, anything that is impervious. You can cover the lot with. But other communities will have a number that is a percentage of the lot size that is for building. Now it's tricky. The one community I reference includes anything with a roof on it as building. So covered patios fill in that, but driveways don't. So, and particularly when you're promoting detached garages, you need some flexibility in having more coverage, pavement coverage, but not building coverage.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's.
So in that historic South where it has the 1,800, that would be, this is in absolute feet, but you'd look at a similar kind of thing and saying that should be 20% or something like that. In that maximum footprint, you'd have a percentage as opposed to a number.
I think they're two different. I think they're two different things we're talking about.
Actually, there is a maximum building footprint, but I think, Gary, what you're referring to is to add something similar to historic residential, so only
right.
specifically residential. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but it's a similar kind of concept we have in
Yes, it
historic
is.
South, and we just make it as a percentage as opposed to a fixed square footage. Lot. Okay,
For residential,
it.
yes. We
okay, yep, all right.
Yeah, and again, I'm not advocating either way, but I know we have had a lot of discussion with recent applications of the size of structures and is that appropriate? And is that what you're getting to, Gary, is some of those discussions?
Well, I am, Jenny, and the one case in point, and it was a conceptual review, but the applicant came with a building that was about 40, and they wanted to do 40%. And they had already received a variance to cover almost the entire lot, and it was commercial, but cover it with pavement. So in the conversations, the discussion was, well, they already have a variance to cover 90%. Our code is not differentiating. They can add that addition and make the building now more than twice the size, and it fits within the code. But my point of that is the space and the way you perceive the space where that building was going to be sited is so different because of the nature of that kind of coverage. And so that's what I'm getting at, more control on building mass on the site.
So what is the guidance of the board? The idea would be to, if you look on page 13 under maximum building footprint, there is a square footage for historic South. So there's two possibilities. There's convert that to a percentage and or apply it also to the historic residential, right? Is that the idea, Gary?
It is, because I'd like I'm going to talk more on the clause about additions in there, but I think there's another way to regulate the growth of structures, and that's where we see a lot of additions to houses. And so if you have a number like that in there, it can provide, it's another way of providing some limits and getting more continuity through that block. But if you have a timeline to get all this passed, something like that may warrant a little study, like the staff did this analysis that did the building cover. So, something like that may warrant, and it could be done pretty easily, but it may require a little more time than you have. But I do think it would really help.
And would it only apply to the South and the historic residential? Wouldn't apply to the public, obviously, and wouldn't apply to the core? Is that correct, Gary?
My own feeling is those are different kind of buildings that you're trying to get along, along High Street and at the core. And so it's a different fabric and a different feel. And you're not so concerned about open space running back through and between the buildings.
Right. So the idea would be to come up with a percentage that applies to the South and the historic residential. And I just want to get the sense, is that the board's direction for staff and us to look at?
Frank, haven't heard from you. What do you think?
Well, it's outside my wheelhouse, but I'm in agreement with Gary and what he's saying. From what I can comprehend, it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Amy?
If it can be, I think it's going to be difficult to add it to the code at this point, but if it can be done, it definitely would be beneficial.
Okay. So I think that, yes, we'd like staff to look at making that into a percentage.
Okay. I mean, again, we can do that research. And again, I mean, the goal tonight is to review all this, get your comments, then we would be providing a revised version for your recommendation, so that you'll have obviously other chance to see if we're hitting the mark for that.
I just want to take a pause here. Do we have any public comments?
I have not received anything at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, anything else on page 13?
I have one other comment, but it'll probably be shorter.
Okay. It's okay, Gary.
The maximum building height change. I think I understand the rationale for that, but I think going down to 24, you're going to make two-story structures extremely difficult, or you're going to see a lot of flat roofs and unusual roof profiles. Because as the building, typically in a historic district, you want a fairly steep pitch on your roof. And as that structure gets wider, say the front of the structure that faces the street is 2 rooms deep, and that's narrow. The roof gets pretty high. So when I started doing the calculations, if you don't want 2-story structures, that's fine. And if that's the goal, to make everything more cottage-like, 29 seems a little bit better number to me, just because I've seen it in areas that want to reduce from 35. I've seen the 29 still providing some flexibility, but we may get some roofs that are hip roofs that come up from all 4 sides and then level off at a flat spot. And if we're okay with that, I just keep it in mind. I know people, I understand residents are sensitive to what's happened. And
Yeah,
so I just think there's
but
something.
it's a pretty big difference between 35 and 24. Jenny, Greg, do you know how we got to 24 on this?
Well, I know that the staff did the analysis of the building height, and it's I think it was one of the more difficult analyses to do, Jenny, if I remember correctly. That probably was the least good data on. Again, looking back at the notes from the November meeting, we were talking about how the 24-foot height would be measured to the midpoint of the of the eaves, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it is the way we measure roof height.
My fault. Then
Okay, it's a good question, good clarification.
But I think that to that point, maybe there ought to be an asterisk or something that 24 is to what point that is, because I think Gary won't be the only one to interpret that.
Okay, and we can look at, because it depends on your roof type. So if it's a flat roof, it's one way. If it's a pitched roof, it's another way. And it's within the definition section, but I think we can definitely.
We could probably add a cross-reference to the definitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And
now,
I do have public comment. Actually, I was mistaken.
Oh.
I apologize. I didn't
Okay.
hear my computer ping. So if you give me 1 second here, I'll share that with you. So Alan and Mary Suter, who live at 80 Franklin Street, submitted two separate pieces of public comment that I will share. So the first was a request to permit residential in historic core. And then the second was, please no hotels in any historic districts. You define bed and breakfast under the permitted uses chart. Does that include Airbnb? Accessory dwellings should be permitted in historic residential. Why are food trucks allowed in historic residential? I don't recall that, but I'll look at that. Use of speakers within 500 feet of residential should be required to cut off at 9 p.m. And don't change lot coverage from 50 to 45 for historic residential. The historic residential is much more dense than the rest of the city.
well, depends on where you look, I think. So yeah, we do allow food trucks. And I think that, I mean, especially since so many events have been canceled, neighborhoods are bringing food trucks in, and I don't know that we want to disallow that.
There's got to be like a time limit on them. It's not like it can sit there and park, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of those temporary time limit.
Yeah, on page 10, food trucks.
Yeah, shall operate before 6 and
Yeah.
not after 10.
Yeah,
Not before 6 and not after 10 p.m.
yeah, I think that,
Yeah, I'm okay with
yeah.
food trucks. I agree. I had commented earlier, I think the accessory dwelling should be allowed personally. If they can make it work and fit on the lot coverage.
I agree. We're seeing in what we do, the traditional family's changing. And so you have people who are taking care of an older family member, someone with disabilities, and I agree as well.
As for the comment about the Airbnb, I think that's a good comment that needs to be addressed somewhere. I know we're dealing with that citywide in general. But there's no note of it anywhere here. I mean, it is clearly something different. And maybe just in the definition of bed and breakfast, we indicate that it's not an AB that.
Right.
But I know the other code is still up in the air and it's not finished.
Right.
We
But
can't
Right,
really
that's
address
where
it.
it's covered.
On the bed and breakfast, it's very specific that the owner needs to reside there, whereas
Yeah.
Airbnb, that typically isn't the case.
Yeah, and that, like you said, Amy, that's not been resolved yet at a council
Yeah.
level. So I mean, we're looking at that citywide. So I guess I'd like to punt that issue until that's determined overall. So I know they're considering all.
What
those
about
factors.
to permit residential in the historic core?
So I think that goes back to our discussion about North Riverview. I guess I'd like to look and see what maybe the unintended consequences of that might be. It may not be an issue. I'd like to look at that though and sort of lay that some scenarios out for that. I'm not
I think
opposed.
that's a really good idea.
I mean, I'm not opposed to having residential in the core. I mean, but there are a few existing residential as it is in the core.
Right.
And I can see some of the older buildings being storefronts on the ground floor and then residential on the
Yeah,
side.
and the thing is, the building size is so small that they don't support commercial real great. So if we can fill those buildings as residential, I'd rather have that than have them deteriorate and
Yeah,
you know, I personally am okay with it because it's a use that size-wise works.
It's more of and again, thinking through the character piece of this and wanting that sort of streetscape and the intensity and what's the right word, vibrancy. Think of on Bridge Street or on High Street, like at the corner, you know, where Donato's Pizza is. I mean, that's sort of not really a good example, but you know what I'm saying? Like that is the core. You're right on that main.
But that would be addressed because the setbacks are given and they would still have to cite it the same they would a commercial building. I mean, they can't cite it real deep in the lot and have a big front yard or anything. So, I mean, it would in theory still have the same streetscape frontage look. And I don't know, it would be that much different than some of the passive service type buildings that we have there as it is.
I think
let us look into it and see what
was taken.
Yeah.
Where did we end up on the accessory use? I got lost on that one. What was the
accessory dwelling? I think the direction was to permit that
in
residential in HR.
In the historic residential?
Yes, is that what everybody's?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hey, Jenny, I was also going to mention that the food trucks have done lunches. I've seen them in historic district, right in front of like where the barber shop is, and the neighborhood. So I don't know if you want to make a caveat, like weekends only or lunchtime permitted anytime. Okay.
I think that's mostly what they're doing. And like I said, I know Waterford Village had food truck with sort of a social gathering, social distance gathering, and with I think. I'm not opposed to that. I think it actually adds to the community. Okay, are we done with page 13? Okay, page 14. Setbacks, any comments, concerns, questions?
The only one I was just thinking, because we had the one, was it last month, where we had the corner lot, and just trying to sort out which is the front.
Okay.
That we don't pick both as the front. I don't know if it's by the address or the most prominent side. That way we don't have to put a variance in for something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
good point.
I mean, it could be whatever your front door is facing, maybe that's the
Yeah.
way to do it. Okay.
Yeah, it could be the front door or where the postal address is. I don't know how we pick it, but
Okay. What does everybody
Also,
else think about that?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You only have one front.
unless it's a double.
Okay.
I guess that'd be a variance at that point.
Yeah,
That'd be a 2-family, so then we could deal with that
yeah,
elsewhere, I think. Okay.
okay. Gary, are you good with everything in the blue? That was all the stuff that was added from last time.
Yeah, I wanted to compliment the staff on and Greg on the rear yard setback.
Yeah,
That addition, I think that's much needed. And I think it's still the 20% for those who might be critical, it's still generous compared to all throughout the city of Columbus, it's 25. Historic districts is there, it's 25. So it's still very generous, given the lot size and given what's done in other areas. So I think it's a nice step.
Great.
I agree. Okay, 15. 16, 17. All right, we're on page 18, chart 153.173C, parking. We have a red line, but no additions.
And
Sean?
we had, I think part of that was cross-referencing the uses to make sure that if the use isn't permitted, then why do we have a parking standard in there? So we'll do that same thing for which again, I'm now seeing for the schools, we'll need to remove those. So I would
And the hotel.
that, yep, and hotel,
hotel.
yep, okay.
and these are the numbers are somehow parking or there's some sort of standard about how you get to that number, or is it somehow more specific to the size of the area?
When it says parking plan, you mean?
Yeah, no, if you say for artisan, I'm just looking on page 20, it says artisan production 2.5 per 1,000 square feet. Is that a standard that we use, or did we try to say that, okay, it's smaller in historic Dublin and we put less, or is that just somehow a standard way of gauging parking?
Again, we would have done research to sort of determine what that applicable, most relatable use is for that. That's how most of these are, is looking into what would be a standard, like a best practice for these, and also
Okay.
in a more urban area.
Okay. Because some of them, they just look like if you it's a permitted use, but how would you get the parking lot on in some of these places would be, unless you can pick some of the public parking as some of the parking you would use. I don't know exactly how it would work.
Yeah.
Because like adult daycare, if you have 2 per 1,000 square feet, however it's going to be, but start to seem like you're going to have to put a lot of lot coverage in for parking if you can't use other places.
Yeah, and again, a lot of these are like approved parking plans, so a potential applicant could, and in a lot of these instances, would provide us sort of what their best practice usage is, knowing their business. And if there is a standard, so let's say it is, whatever it is, 2.5 per 1,000. If in the end they say we only need 2 per 1,000, they could come to you with their own parking plan and recommend something less. So there is opportunity for flexibility there. We've left that opportunity in there.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Page 20. I had a question about conference center, especially since we've approved Cohatch. I believe that is, even though it's a co-working, it's a conference center as well.
Yeah, I want to see what the definition says, because I think we would say their co-working space is office. We would probably have classified it as that, not necessarily conference center, but let me see what.
They actually might be both, because I think that's one of the ways they list themselves, is you could have a conference there if you
that's
need.
true. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, a facility designed to accommodate and support meetings or conferences. Facility may either be freestanding or incorporated into a hotel or office facility and may include eating and drinking, but excluding overnight lodging if not part of a hotel. So we
That
could
would be
add that back in to cover
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any comments, questions on page 20 or 21? 22, 23? 24, 25? These are all parking things. 26, 27? 28, 29? 30, 31? 32, 33? Landscaping, tree preservation?
Actually, real quick, before we leave parking, and maybe it's in there, it's just gonna be easier for me to ask, I'm sorry. Did we address temporary, like, loading zones? Because I know we have we've always had a problem of them just stopping in the middle of the street and assuming
Yeah.
people are gonna go in the traffic on the other lane.
Page 28, there's a minimum loading spaces required for principal structure.
Living space dimension.
For 3
But-
gets to use, but maybe not as specifically as where you're going with this.
Well, I'm just saying, like, how do they like, how is use, so they're only required, how does it determine if they need a loading space, I guess, is where I'm going
Yeah.
with that. Like, how do you determine what businesses are required to accommodate a loading place and which aren't? Because, I mean, yes, you have restaurants who are clearly going to get deliveries, but then you might have some other business that has FedEx there every single day because they have a FedEx truck pickup or something, so how do you determine who should accommodate loading vehicles?
So if you look a little bit above that, it's tiny letter B, number required, which now that you're bringing this up, that's a good point to.
Right, you're just basing it on size. I mean, thinking it's kind of tied to use.
Okay.
Just because, so I think we should consider that, what uses might have a higher demand for loading and unloading on a pretty regular basis that they would require accommodations. And obviously it's probably only going to work for new builds. We can't really change the current street grid to,
Right.
put a loading space out in front of Domino's, that's like,
They
they just stop in the intersection and you drive around them. But
Well, they do. That's exactly what happens.
right. So I just, as new things come in, if we can somehow accommodate those loading zones in the alleys or on their site,
Yeah,
that would be wonderful.
I think page 27, required loading spaces through 28 covers that.
Well, but I'm saying, my question is, does it cover it?
Oh, okay.
By it's not just because just because it's a small building or a big building doesn't mean that it will or will not need a lot of deliveries.
And I honestly, given its minimum requirements based on size, and if you're under 25,000, you don't have to provide anything. So
right, and that's nothing in the historic district is going to be that size.
Right.
So
okay.
I don't know if there's a way that somehow we could get some of these new businesses that are going to go in to figure out a way to maybe not have their trucks stopping in the middle of High Street.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can look at and see if there's a way to Greg, have you ever seen that addressed based on use, or is it mostly by, I know our regular zoning code, standard code talks based on size, but.
Right, no, I've seen it based on use. These
Okay.
these are carried over from the previous regulations,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just that we're never gonna get those sizes of buildings, which means we're never gonna need that particular section.
Right, that's a great point. Okay.
Yeah, and honestly, Amy, that's the first time I've heard this come up. So we'll have to look at that. This was
Okay.
most of this section was just carryover
Right.
from previous regulation. Good
Good
point.
catch,
Jeff.
Amy.
Yeah.
Good catch. Okay. How's everybody doing? It's almost 8 o'clock. We're not halfway through.
Are we dividing this up? We're not doing it all tonight, are we?
Well,
I mean, we can talk about that maybe as we get a little further here and see how people are feeling.
yeah, I
so.
think, does anybody need to take a break?
Power through.
Okay. All right. We're going.
If you're, I'm not sure you're asking me, but at least the code part, if we could get through part of it, then we could be working on that, and then we could do the
I totally
guidelines
agree.
later.
That's why I
would be
started
fine.
with the code rather than the guidelines.
Okay.
All right, page 33. We're talking about landscaping and tree preservation. 34. 35. 36. 37. Feel like I'm calling bingo. 38. 39. I had a question on 39. Is this both for residential and commercial, or just one or the other? Tree preservation. Because there are a lot of historic trees in historic Dublin.
Typically, it is for commercial properties. I'm looking here to see.
I'm not sure it specifies that. here.
Yeah. I mean, our standard code exempts residential just because that potentially penalizes homeowners from removing trees.
So let me ask you, what
what's
would
the
you
issue?
like to make sure it does or doesn't do? There's a lot of lead-in language here that might address that, and without looking at it specifically right now.
Sure.
But the question is, what would you want it to be, and we can make sure it does that. Only applied to the non-residential?
Well, I think I'm particularly concerned about the trees that are along the river. There is some ancient sycamores back there that I would really hate to see, but right now anybody could go and cut those down if they own that property.
I don't think we can put a restriction on private residences if nowhere else in the city of Dublin
I
we
understand.
give them that restriction.
He just asked what my concern was. so
Yeah.
that-
I also think there's an easement along the river that, and I'm assuming the easement that Columbus has around the river, I don't know if that changes when it comes to Dublin, but I know up and down the river, there is a certain distance off that shoreline that you cannot touch any landscape in that area.
It depends on your
Reasonable.
deed. My deed says I own property to the low point in the river.
Yep.
But not everybody.
Mine says the center of the river.
Yeah, so not everybody
Yeah.
says the same thing. Okay, we'll just let it go. I just had it didn't specify commercial on this. So
I think it should apply though to any new development. Like if someone's bringing in a site plan, whether they're building a residence or a commercial building, they should have to abide by our landmark tree rules. In my opinion, I don't think just because it's a brand new residence, they can come in and clear the whole lot. So I don't, in my opinion. But I don't think it should apply to existing residential
yeah,
Okay, new development.
because
Okay.
it doesn't apply to anyone in the city.
Okay. Okay, well, let's look at that and see.
Okay. Page 40, 41.
I had a question. It's related to 41 and 42. We call out the difference between a fence and a street wall, but there's really no definition of what that is. Is that defined somewhere? I just think it should be. It's not clear what the difference between a fence and a street wall, like what makes them different, so if it's not defined, it should be. The other question on 41, under opacity and height, under A, it says 4 feet or no more than 50% opacity. Well, what is that different from the limestone fences? I mean, they're a fence and you can't see through them. So I'm not sure how you classify our existing dry laid limestone walls. Because at first I thought, well, maybe that's what you're calling a street wall versus a fence, but.
So to answer your first question, they are defined differently in the code.
Okay. We just didn't have the definition section, so I didn't know if they were defined.
Yes, you're correct. And the street wall is defined as something that is opaque. It doesn't give a percentage though, so we could be clearer that maybe if it's a fence, that has opacity. If it's the stone wall, doesn't. I guess maybe I'll use Greg's tactic. What do you want it to say, Amy?
I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I have a dry laid limestone across my property. I call it a fence. I mean, I don't know. I guess, is it a wall?
Yeah, I think it's being referred to as a stone wall throughout.
A stone wall?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's going to be, that's moved under us for preservation.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yeah. Okay.
In the definitions between the different things.
That's good. And I did get some additional public comment.
Okay.
Let me finish writing here if you don't mind 1 second.
Sure. Go right ahead.
Okay, so one was going back to that rear yard setback and not wanting it to be 20%. Also, again, these are continuation of comments from Alan and Mary Suter on Franklin Street. Rear yard setbacks at 20% would make ours 35. It is currently 25 feet. So if they have concerns about decreasing their rear yard setback. And then.
But we wouldn't be increasing something that exists today. It's all for new build, correct?
No, it would apply to, so if somebody, an existing residential property wanted to do an addition or make a modification, they would have to comply with those standards. Or if they were doing some alteration, they would have to meet that same standard. So that was the first comment, additional comment. And then they had another additional comment related to outdoor waste containers. Let's see here. Outdoor waste container storage should be required to adhere to the guidelines whenever the principal use of the building changes. So I know there's a particular, I can shed some light on that, instance where there's a commercial use that doesn't have a dumpster. So they don't have a dumpster enclosure. They're just using trash cans, which are ordinance related to trash can screening is residentially specific. So I think what they're getting at, because there are a number of those properties on Franklin Street that abut commercial uses, that if they don't have a dumpster, they can have individual trash cans and those aren't required to be screened. So we could look at adding something to the code related to that for commercial uses. If you all agree, that definitely seems like a reasonable, if we're requiring residential people to do that, that would make sense. From
Sure.
a commercial perspective to require that. What does everybody think about that?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you guys?
Makes sense.
It's not included in, what is this, outdoor waste 6A, on page 43?
We can clarify that, I think, a little more.
Yeah.
I think it's really meant for like if you had a dumpster as opposed to like individual rollout containers.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if you clarify in there, then it
Yeah.
probably.
And can't we just reference our regular city code that requires
I think we could do
screening
that,
of?
make that easier, yeah, and say it applies to commercial properties too. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I have at this point, so.
Okay. 42, 43.
Speaking of that screening, my only comment was for the roof mounted equipment, 4A, it says it shall be fully screened from view. Is there another code section we should reference about how they're allowed to screen it? Because isn't that in the regular code somewhere of how they're allowed to screen it? I just think we should clarify that the screening counts in the overall height of the building.
You mean by materials they could use?
Yeah, I know it was in some of the other code, like, yeah, what type of materials, the opacity of how it had to be screened, where on the, like, I thought there was something elsewhere in the code. But also, I'm just wondering if we should clarify too that any rooftop mechanicals count, and their screening counts to the height of the building. And it's not in addition to the height that they're allowed.
We can look at how the height is defined and to make sure that that's.
Yeah, I thought that's what I was thinking from being on planning and zoning. I thought those issues were covered somewhere in our city code.
And it might be this is part of where the building type standards. So that's great. So
yeah, I
let us
don't remember. I
double check
thought
that.
it was covered somewhere that we laid that stuff out.
Yep, okay, let us look into that, okay.
Okay, we're on page 43. We're moving into lighting. Continues on 44, 45. 46, we're moving into signs. 47. 48, which is all new material.
And for just, I'm still, I mean, I think we talked about signs before, but then what is it? D, sign 2. Some of them talking about 3 colors, or if you have a 5, now I'm looking with my notes are not very clear here. If you have a trademark or something, you have more colors. I was having a hard time figuring out, for me, that wasn't very clear when I was reading through that. I'm like, I still was unclear what it even meant. And we had the sign meeting the 2 weeks ago, and I'm still not quite sure. I know background color versus.
I think, Jenny, one thing that would make it clear in D1, or it might be in multiple places, but as far as the sign color, it says signs shall be limited to 3 colors. I think we should say, and black and white are considered colors. It's not that you get 3 colors and black and white, but I think what you need to say is that black and white are considered colors, and you can have up to 3 colors. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if your text is black on a white, if you have black text on a white background, that's 2 colors.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it says that in the stuff we went over last week.
But
there's some other places there, yeah.
It's in a couple of places, but I think that would help clarify it, is what you're trying to say, is that black and white are considered colors. Like empty white space is a color.
Yeah, okay, no, that's good. We can clarify that. And I guess to answer your question, Sean, or I think where you were going with that is, if you have a logo that has multiple colors, we would consider, so like Nationwide Children's Hospital has the butterflies, which have, infinite number of colors. That's their logo. That counts as 1 color. So you could have that really colorful logo. That's 1 color. Then you could have blue and white or black and white or whatever your color palette might be. but we don't want to penalize you with your logo. And
Okay.
regulating that.
That's what I was coming through, because I figured some logos have 5 colors in them, and I was like,
Right.
Yeah.
just
And
having
we
a hard
used to
time.
have that as our standard. If you had a logo that had an infinite number of colors, it used to only allowed to be one color. So then we're regulating content, and that gets us in some dicey spots here. So
Okay, so yeah, that's that for me. That too, it's just still unclear, a bit unclear to me that means that. Yeah.
okay, and we
Okay.
can look at that and see if maybe that could be cleaned up to be a
Okay.
little clearer. So
Okay.
if y'all want us to. Okay.
Page 47. '48. 49. 50, 51. 52, 53.
And Jen, I guess some of this will get updated, because if I remember sandwich boards in the last meeting, we talked about something there. So this will be consistent with what we talked about in the 2 weeks ago with the zoning joint.
So, and we have made modifications to, I mean, yes, we can make sure those match. We're
Okay.
not quite through that yet, but the
Yep.
sandwich board signs in terms of the types of materials and wanting those to be more high quality and not be the white plastic ones, I think that everyone is very adverse to. We have updated this to not allow those anymore. So if you have one now, you can retain that, but if you get a new one or you're a new business, you have to comply with the new standards. But I will
Okay.
make sure that that matches any other discussion we had with the temporary sign ordinance.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
54, 55. We're getting into design standards. '56, '57. '58, '59. 60, 61. I think you would take particular look at 153.175 since it talks about us.
Yeah, I had some comments regarding that. So I just want to make sure that you've put a definition of what you're using as historic sites and landmarks somewhere in the code. Again, I didn't have a definition section in the printed text I was looking at. But those should be defined, because they're like, a historic site has a very specific definition if you're talking about Secretary of Interior standards. But it's also used very colloquially from local organizations who just think, you know, I really like this. It's a historic to our community. So whatever our definition is, that's fine. It just needs to be written down somewhere.
And we do have that.
And then one suggestion for A5, it says record, protect, and preserve archaeological resources. It would probably just be easier to say cultural resources, because then that includes everything above ground and underground. It includes both your architectural and archaeological. So you just say preserve cultural resources.
Do you think people will know that that means what's underground as well?
It's a term of the industry. It could also be, again, another one of those things that we put in a definition somewhere.
I think we probably need to do that, because we have a number of houses and buildings along High Street that are going to be torn down, and there could be things underground that we'd want.
And you could, I mean, cultural covers both. You could also say architectural and archaeological resources.
Okay.
You know, what in the industry, it's not just buildings, it's buildings and sites and objects and archaeological sites under the ground, and all of that is lumped together under cultural resources. So that would include our quarries and our stone walls. And
okay. So I like that, but I think we ought to then, to your point on definitions, Amy, I think we need to define what we mean by cultural, because
yes.
I'm guessing most people wouldn't think of things underground.
So I just think we should be a little broader
Yeah.
and have a little bigger scope. So
I agree.
Um,
I specifically suggested adding that because I was concerned that they would just come in and dig up some of these sites and there, who knows what's underground, you know?
yeah, no, it's good. I want to make it even broader and just make sure, like I said, I don't know, Jenny, if it's in, so define what we're calling historic sites, define what we're calling landmarks. In B5, you use the term preservation districts. That should be defined. What does that mean? It says maintain an inventory of all landmarks and preservation districts. So, as far as I
There
know,
are definitions for some of these that you're
yeah,
talking
well,
about
as far
on
as I
public.
know, there's nothing in our city that is defined as a preservation district. So,
Yep.
I just think if we're going to use those terms and say that we're in charge of regulating those things and looking out for those things, then we should define what those things are.
No, that's good. I mean, that's that's a good catch. That's probably language that goes back, Jenny, to the very first historic regulations that the city had.
Right. We do define historic site and landmark, so that is in our current code. But the preservation district is not. So that's good. Okay, well, we'll cross-reference some of those sort of.
And then you also in B5, you added make determinations of contributing and not contributing. Again, define those. I know they're defined in the assessment report that was done.
Speaking of the assessment report, it would be really helpful if we all had a copy of that.
It's very long. I've read it all.
Which is why I don't want to burn up my printer, and I can, you know, it's helpful to have some of these things in hard copies.
And we can definitely do that. And I think we have pulled for because the historical cultural assessment covers all properties. We have also then for staff and ease of use pulled the ones more specific to the historic district. So I think we could, because as Amy said, I mean, the binder is probably like a 5-inch binder of material. So I mean, I think we could include the background parts, which are really helpful background information, but you probably don't necessarily need or want every single inventory sheet, which is like over 1,000. So
yeah, no,
definitely compile the ones that are applicable under your purview.
that would be really
definitely
helpful.
easy. Yep. Okay. Okay, I heard my computer ding, so that must mean I have more public comment here.
Okay.
Nope, I do not. Sorry, it's
Okay.
something else.
All right, page 62. Anything? 63. 64. Gary, you got awful quiet there. 65.
I'll have some things later. I'm
Okay. 60, excuse me, 66. The other thing that, as I was going through this, I thought, and I know I'm not trying to burden you with a lot of, I would prefer to have a hard copy of the community plan as well. It just makes it, we refer to these things, but trying to go through and find these things online and read them is very difficult.
Yeah, and that since it's a web-based version, I mean, we can definitely print those things. It's a web format, so some of that's really challenging. You won't get the full amount of information for that, but I mean, we can definitely help provide some of that to your more ease of use.
Okay. Anything on 66, 67?
I had a question on 67, what your intent of adding, you added 4E. I'm wondering where that came from.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting one.
Yeah, that was a specific comment that was made by the board at one of the previous meetings.
I think it was Planning Commission, actually.
Oh, was it Planning Commission?
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's why that's a question here then. I've forgotten that. That was suggested.
It shows up on 71. I have it on page 71. Because it shows up there as well. And I'm assuming that's, we've had a few times when we've said, we need more information, more documentation. There aren't clear wall sections. We can't understand. I'm assuming that's what it's referring to, those kind of comments.
It's getting to that, and it's getting to, I think, making sure that if they're making modifications to an existing historic structure, that they're doing it appropriately, that you're not, blasting your building and deteriorating your brick. So we're making sure that the person bringing forward these applications has looked into the methodology behind how they would either build something new or modify something existing. So it's really getting to that.
Well, first of all, it should be the applicant, because the applicant himself wouldn't have the technical expertise. So it should be the applicant has demonstrated that they've consulted with or, had those experts on their team. It might not be the applicant itself. The way it reads, you're making the applicant have to be a technical expert with experience in construction.
Well,
So,
actually, I mean, that's a tricky one because we've had some design professionals who don't appear to be experts in their profession present some things. I mean, I think the applicant, if it's a design professional, does need a level of experience, even drawing and understanding a detail and how that works. If they can't describe what they're proposing in the documentation they prepare, then that's demonstrating either a lack of care or a lack of knowledge. And so to me, I mean, I understand your point, Amy. They're not the person actually nailing the trim up, but they better know, what that profile is, where it's coming from, what it looks like, what material it is.
well, I'd say that the actual applicant, technically, the applicant on the case is a lot of times the property owner. Then they've hired an architect. Yes, that architect needs to have the expertise. Or
we could add it to say the applicant or applicant representative. I think we could.
I would say the applicant and his representatives or his, team or whatever. So sometimes, the applicant is the property owner and they have no clue how to do it. That's why they're hiring. So they just have to show that they've hired the experts or consulted the experts.
And we could also even make it, I mean, sort of like B through B, C, D all say that the concept plan demonstrates, so we could even make it more generic that the plan, the plan that they're bringing forward, whomever that may be, demonstrates that they're doing this.
The plan shows they've consulted experts or expert. Yes.
Yeah,
I just think, if from a legal standpoint, the applicant on there, it's very unlikely the applicant listed is the person that knows anything.
Not true. In many of the forms we prepare, we are the applicant on behalf of our client. And frequently the client has to write a letter. But in many architectural review districts, people don't even want to go to the meetings. They send their design professional as their applicant. And it says, so-and-so is applying for this. And then the owner's listed someplace else. And people do that with, or at least what I see sitting in meetings, complex zoning issues, they'll send their attorney as the applicant on behalf. So, but I mean, we may be just splitting hairs here, as long as it's covered.
We can cover both of those.
Yeah, that's easy. Yep.
Okay, so we're down to 67, 68, 69. On the preliminary development plan. 70. 71.
So Jenny, if I read this right, we're going back to the original terms, right, of preliminary plan and final plan.
That never really applied in the historic district, but in order to provide consistency, yes, we have done that. So.
Okay. So we're not using the Bridge Street terms, right?
No, no. And
Gotcha.
again, I think citywide, even we have a whole nother area of town that has a whole nother set of terms. So we're really
Right.
trying, that's what people are used to. So we're trying to.
Right, the preliminary plan, final plan. I like that.
Good. Okay, good.
Okay, 72, 73. 74, 75.
We've got the same language on 74. We'll clean up with the technical
Right.
expertise.
Okay. '76, 77, we're into demolition.
Just one thing, I just have a quick question. I see that at least on 74 for minor projects, we've lowered the square footage for minor projects, which I like. I think that's good. I'd personally like to see it even smaller because I think a 75,000 square foot is not small or
Yeah.
minor. Can you just give me a little like background on how you arrived at that number? Is that why we're stopping at that?
So a lot of it is the threshold of what pushes it over the edge to follow either the minor project, which is a one-step process, versus the concept preliminary final. So
Right.
a larger project wanting
But I'm
to.
saying, where did you
Where did the
finally?
number come from?
Where'd you get the
75?
75? Like I realize I'm glad it went from 10 to 75. I would love to see it go lower. But I'm just curious who came up with that, if that was a council thing or where that number came
No,
from.
it was staff looking at recent applications and trying to understand if the threshold. So again, Cohatch, that was a 10,000 square foot building that felt appropriate, that one should have gone through that multi-step process. So, but again, it seemed like given the existing commercial uses and new development, 7,500 seemed like maybe an even better number threshold, because the scale of that on what some of these smaller lots could really be impactful.
Oh, that's what I think. 75 is a huge
Okay.
building in historic Dublin. Like in my opinion, it's not a minor project. But I'm just one person, so.
Okay. No, it's a good question.
I always wondered about that myself.
Is there board consensus that it should be lowered further?
To what
Sean?
number?
I don't have a magic number. I just think that a building that size, if you look at the average size of buildings in historic Dublin, a building of 7,500 square feet is pretty large compared to the existing buildings. And if you're going to build something bigger than the average existing building, I don't think it should be called a minor project.
Okay.
I don't know what the number is because I don't know what the average size of the building in historic Dublin is. But
we can look at that. I mean, 5,000 probably, I wouldn't want to go less than that, but I think that's at least maybe somewhere in that, between either that or somewhere in that range, we can look at.
Yeah, if you could pull some square footage of buildings in the district.
Yeah.
And we could get an average. Like I said, I don't want to say that a minor project is something two sizes bigger than the average building there.
Okay.
Or whatever the number is.
But Amy, what's your concern because it still goes through the review? So what your concern is?
It goes through a much shorter, less detailed review. They're required to bring a lot less information to the table.
And you don't get to see it as many times. So if
it's not a minor project, then they have to come to you with a preliminary plan and a final plan. So you get to see it twice.
But then we should define it in a certain way, because certainly there's going to be things that are 7,500 that are minor, right? Having more hurdles just because they're bigger. I have to admit I haven't seen many of them, so I think I don't know if square footage is the right definition. Maybe that's not the right definition.
I mean, that in terms of staff trying to administer that, I would recommend sticking with the square footage, because that's really hard for us to judge then if it's.
Yeah.
Maybe a starting point, like it says, to find out what the average size building is.
We can look at that and go from there. Yeah.
Okay. All right, 76. We're on demolition, 77. To Amy's point on page 77 under 4, and maybe we need to define that archaeological assessment to a cultural.
Got it. Okay.
78, 79. 80, 81. 82, 83. 84, 85. I have one question. So I know we're part of the review process, but what is at the back end, the validation that people did what they said they were going to do?
So once you approve a project, and if we had conditions of approval for that, we typically will try to work with the applicant before they would submit either a permit or a certificate of zoning plan approval, depending on what's needed for their next step. So we try to work with them before to hash out what these conditions are and how they're met ahead of time. But if they're not, and they would just then submit a building permit, we look at those as well. So the reviewer of that happens through building standards, but there is a zoning representative that looks at those, and she would have, or he would have, record of minutes, discussion, the staff report, the board order that has all these conditions, and they would make sure that they're met. And we're a really collaborative group, so we are meeting with them, a couple days a week to make sure that those are being met and discussed. And if there's questions, then we review those. Sometimes we even sit down and look at the permit with them to make sure that they're being adhered to. And then on the construction end side, there are certain sign-offs that are required. And then again, sometimes things happen and then we realize it in the field and then have to deal with it. We had an application, I think at the last meeting, that had that similar instance where we're noticing that something didn't, maybe the permit showed it and it just got constructed in a different way, and then having to remedy that. So there's lots of catches along the way, and you guys also have good eyes on the street too. So that does help us sometimes, but we really try to make sure we're all reviewing and looking at it. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jenny. 88, 86, 87. 88, 89. 90, 91. And the last page is the Appendix G. All right. How you guys doing? We're done with code. I would say.
Oh, actually, I have one quick thing as before we move on. Appendix G. I was just reading through it real quick when we were talking. We should add the new cemetery that was identified to that
great
list.
Catch. Yep, thank you. Good point. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And also, is the little, there's the Ferris, the one by Ferris Wright Park, right off Riverside Drive. That's not listed on here either.
I'll double check that because we did do some cross referencing, but I'll double check.
I don't see it on here.
Okay.
The earthwork, the Holderite earthworks are on here.
Yeah.
But not since you're calling out specific cemeteries, that one's not on there.
And is that one in the right of way?
Probably.
Which is probably why we didn't catch it, because we would have gone with city-owned property.
It's probably on the right of way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can add that anyway. Okay.
Right up at the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
right
most likely
on the hill, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's north of Emerald Parkway, south of Bright Road, on the east side of Riverside.
Yeah.
The sign I think calls it Ferris Cemetery.
Okay,
It's
we'll
either
double check
2
that.
or 4 graves. I can't remember.
Okay.
Sorry, Frank, what did you say? I'm sorry.
I'm saying I think it's a family, 2 or 4 graves, probably a farm family, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's the family that lived there on the corner. It's that's,
Right.
I didn't know if you were counting it as part of the Holder Wright Earthworks Park or if it should be called out separately.
Yeah, let me look into
Because
that.
it's
We'll
not
see.
technically part of the park plan yet.
Right.
What
Okay.
about the Ann Simpson Davis Cemetery on Riverside? Or is that in Columbus?
Oh, the one further south? That's
Yeah.
in Columbus. South
Okay.
by Riverside Green?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's City of Columbus. Once you hit Martin Road, it's City of Columbus.
okay. All right. Ready to go through the guidelines? This much will probably be much quicker. All right, overview page, can't see the page number, 6 and 7. 8, 9. Oh, here's the map. Historic Dublin map. 10, 11. 14, 15. We're in content, neighborhood character. 16, 17.
My personal opinion in 17 under the neighborhood character is we use the word development way too much. I think there's way too much emphasis on development. I don't think we should, how do I say this? Like in the 1, 2, 3, the 4th bullet says allow selective redevelopment. It's like, well, who decides? Like who selects? How do we select it? It says targeted commercial infill. I have a problem with specifically drawing attention to redeveloping and new development in the district, I guess. I don't know.
What do the rest of you think?
It just seems like we use the word way too much in that description. To me, it's like we're overemphasizing, hey, we want to redevelop our historic district.
Sean?
I mean, maybe I don't know that. For me, I was thinking it's more about developing its character inside of what it is, right? I wasn't thinking about, for me, redevelopment because hopefully we're gonna maintain what its character is. So I didn't see it that way, but I see how you could interpret it.
Maybe I just interpreted it that way. I just see it, people coming in and changing and developing it, redeveloping it.
Gary, what do you think?
I think it depends on the connotations you apply with the word development. And developer. And because on one hand, I could look at it and say, I mean, I understand what it means. You could argue the one conceptual review we did about tearing down a non-contributing structure is an example of this. But I think developer and development does suggest larger scale and sometimes not the right motives in a historic district. So I do think the wording could be changed. And there's some wording in other places in this document that I think are rugged yet. But there are other places it was changed. So I like the stone wall clarification. So I don't want to be too critical because you picked up a lot of the comments we made earlier when we reviewed this. But I'm not offended by it, but the word development and historic district sometimes seem mutually exclusive. So I kind of.
But and I think, and I agree, totally agree with that. And I think it's just the fact that I think it's used like 8 times in that paragraph. It's just like throwing it at you. So maybe we could try to revise it a little bit.
We'll try to
soften a little bit.
Well, not so heavy-handed with development.
Yeah,
Okay.
with the word development, in case some of us look at it not good.
I'd like to see more preservation and less development.
Got it, right, I
Yeah,
got it. Okay.
yeah, and especially the
Equal
that
number.
fourth bullet that says selective redevelopment, that one I think needs to be a little reworded.
Okay.
Okay.
And again, I think we were trying to get at, we want there to be allowances for
Sure.
people to redevelop, but I get where I get what
But there's an assumption of that. I mean, there's an assumption that that's gonna happen, you know, and because there's a section in this code that talks about new buildings, so we're not excluding it.
Right,
I
right.
just don't want to throw it out there like, come
No,
and
that's a good-
redevelop everything.
That's a good point. Okay.
Frank, any thoughts on that?
Not really. I mean, a little bit of semantics, but semantics can mean a lot when we're writing code. So,
Yeah.
sure, if we could rewrite it to a better way, why not?
Okay, thank you. All right, 18, 19.
I just have my one comment on 18. In the middle of the paragraph, there's a sentence that says a small number of newer structures. Just have to remember that the word newer is always going to be moving. 10 years from now, something's not going to be new, so I don't know. I think we should kind of rephrase whatever we were trying to say there.
Yep.
My other general comment, and it's probably not going to get changed, and I'm just going to have to live with it, but the term structure is just not the right term. In the industry, it's a building, a structure, an object, or a site, right? So building and structure are two totally different things. So in the industry, a structure is a bridge. So it's just more of a pet peeve to me because we're also trying to follow a little bit of Secretary of Interior standards and do that. Yet we use the word structure everywhere throughout this. So
Are you suggesting change structure to building?
the word, if you are using it, it should be building. It's a building. The term structure actually replies to like an engineering designed, like a bridge or a culvert or a roadway. Because also, in this industry, so it could be an object, like an object would be a statue or a stone wall or something. But in this case, every time you use the word structure, you actually mean a building.
Okay.
We can look at that. I mean, typically in zoning, all buildings are structures.
Right. I just said in the historic preservation world and in Secretary of Interior world and like design guideline world, it's a building. So again, it's just
Yeah, no, that's we can.
it's a
definitely look at that.
nomenclature thing that has a very specific definition in the industry, but that's related to this document.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Good. Okay, anything on 19?
The fourth bullet, the sentence is kind of awkward. I think you could just say encouraging new residential buildings to have consistent setbacks
Yeah,
instead of to locate at the street with, like it's
Okay.
just kind of.
That's easy. Yep.
and thank you for the last bullet. That will make my neighbors very happy.
Good. Okay.
All right, 2021.
I was kind of confused by the addition of the rendering that says our agricultural building type. I'm not quite sure why there was a rendering there or why it's called an agricultural building type.
It's a barn.
Yeah, I
I
just
mean, we have all the architectural styles called out, so I think it was just consistency as we do for some of the other, as we get
Yeah.
further into it.
well, I mean, there's like 3 or 4 standard barn types, like actual like types of barns. That being not like any, I don't know. I just think you should take it out. You have pictures to the left.
Right, I think it's when you get down into these next pages, like in the 20s, we have then here's what this, we have a picture, here's what the standard, not standard, that's not the right word, sort of.
But I guess
typical-
the picture you're using isn't the standard barn.
Okay,
If you're gonna
okay,
use a
got it,
standard
okay.
barn, use what's called like an English or a 3-bay barn, like a standard. It would be well, it's kind of like the one in the middle, but usually with a gabled roof and not a gambrel roof. But
Okay.
okay. It looks like a house, like a 2-story house with
Yeah.
like
Okay.
it doesn't look like a barn. I can send you a picture of a standard one if you want me to.
Sure, that'd be fine. Yeah. If everybody else is agreeable to that, that's yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
22, 23.
Yeah, 22, the top, I have some concerns about under overview, and then the next paragraph, even the sentence structure. And this will be interesting to have Amy's perspective, but vernacular buildings possess a particular style, generally represent of the homeowner's preference.
Yeah, I had that entire section crossed out and everything in red in the next paragraph crossed out.
Okay,
On my notes.
because to me, that's not the definition of a vernacular style.
Nope.
And then
That's not the definition of vernacular.
and then when I go down further, just the sentence structure, and it's probably a typo somewhere, I couldn't find it, but Dublin, historic Dublin have elements of a style or have no particular style which, and then there's a period there. And I don't know if something got edited out.
Okay.
You see at the end of which, there's a period. Second paragraph.
Yeah, where you added the new red text.
I'm in the red text.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, okay.
Yeah, there's a
So-
typo there.
Okay.
So something's missing. So, but that whole section about vernacular, that's not, I actually thought it was clearer in what we had before. It was simpler about just
Okay.
defining vernacular and not personalizing it with the previous owner, or even saying it has elements of a style. I think it could be simpler.
Okay.
I think the first in paragraph 1, the first red sentence is totally fine. Some of the buildings possess characteristics of a specific architectural style, however, the vast are vernacular in character. And then just delete everything else after that.
Okay. That's easy. That's an easy fix.
And then for the next paragraph, just delete everything you put in red and just say that the buildings can be categorized, by their style and type. I mean, I don't think you need any of that, whatever it was. So.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. Page
And as for Gary's comment about the personal preference, whatever, you say it again or allude to it in paragraph 3 here. And it actually works, or it can work if you just, the sentence that starts each building within, okay, so just delete the word each and just say buildings within the district may demonstrate the original owner's personal taste. Like, that's fine if you want to leave that in there. It's not really necessary.
Okay.
But
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. All right, 24, 25.
oh, there was one other typo on 22. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's in the last paragraph, in the last full paragraph, the first sentence, third line. Each building within the historic Dublin and on designated. It should be within the historic district.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Okay. Now, 24, 25. 27. 28, 29. 3031. 3233. Okay, any comments, any public comments before we go to the last section here?
Nope, I just checked. I don't have any public comments.
Okay, we're in the user guide. Page 36, 37.
I had a comment on page 36 under 3.2, the second paragraph. I think you need a word to make that first sentence work. I think if you said the guidelines also offer guidance to ensure new buildings align with the character of the district
Right,
and building additions.
right.
I think you're missing a word there.
Yep.
Okay.
Good catch.
Yes, we've read it too many times.
Oh, no, I know. It's a lot easier to edit than to write it the first time.
Yes,
I
that is
totally know
true.
that. And then on page 37, the second bullet there, I think it needs to be reworded. Maybe it's very subjective to say something is not as historically relevant.
Okay.
So, you know, like saying something's less relevant and should have a less standard. I just don't think that I don't even know that we need the bullet altogether. I think we can just say contributing buildings help define the context. Non-contributing buildings don't. I mean, that's the definition that is used by the, you know, the consultant in the consultant report.
Okay.
Just remove that paragraph.
I would remove the paragraph because I think it adds ambiguity and causes confusion.
Done.
The rest of you agree with that? Gary?
I mean, if you want to define contributed buildings, that's fine. Use the definition specifically from the consultant report. It has a very specific meaning, you know,
Right,
term.
Right.
Right. Gary, you okay with this?
No, I think it's a good suggestion.
Good suggestion.
So removing that second bullet on 37. That's what you're
Frank?
suggesting. Okay.
Frank, you good?
Agreed.
Sean?
Okay.
Okay. All right, now we're on rehabilitation, chapter 4, page 40.
I just had a question on 4 point and maintenance construction. I mean, we list some things, but not other. It felt weird that, you know, A, B, C, and D are there, but there's other things, right? I didn't know if it was not knowing why we added just, you know, have foundations, abrasive cleaning, flashing. I mean, I know we're putting in other maintenance things in there, but is there a reason that we just these 3 or 4 things? It was just,
Well,
it just
Goes back
seems
to that
strange.
same, yeah, this goes back to that same discussion and recommendation by Planning Commission. So I think that's, we originally, I think as Greg alluded to at the beginning of this meeting, we were looking at the guidelines, really wanting to take out those maintenance and how to maintain and what are the guidelines, because
Yeah.
the Secretary of Interior standards do a really good job of how to do that, and methods, you know, potentially change and are adapted. So we didn't really feel like that was appropriate here, but Planning Commission really felt strongly that we should include some of these things here. Again, if we think it's too specific, we could potentially go.
It feels too specific and then too general, right? It's specific in something and just leaves everything. I mean, if there, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know about the Secretary of the Interior guidelines, but if it's something in there that stays up to date all the time, that feels like we would refer to that.
Actually, the Secretary of Interior standards rarely ever change. I've been
Yeah.
doing this for almost 25 years now, and they haven't changed much. They do have some, it's written pretty broad. But what I would suggest in that section is you have under A, property owners should refer to the Secretary of Interior guidelines for appropriate maintenance. I would just put a caveat that, hey, here is a list of here's a list of suggestions or techniques, but it's not like it's not all inclusive.
It's not all inclusive.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that this is, you know, here are some of the common items, this is not an
Gotcha.
all-inclusive list. Go
Yeah.
look at the
Okay.
guidelines.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
have 2 A's here. So if you use A, the first A, and then indent.
Yeah, indent.
Yeah, because I think you can, because this is not code, you can have a little introductory paragraph.
Yeah.
Just, like you have applicability, it's just a paragraph, it's not an action, so I think you can have an introductory
Okay.
paragraph that says, hey, go follow the codes, but here's some pretty common ones.
Right. Okay. That's good.
Okay, 41. 42. 43.
On 43 under 4.12A, it's a little awkward to say the addition should be at a smaller scale where appropriate or other similar measures. It's
Yeah,
not,
that's very
it's not
confusing.
written right. I think the bottom line is that the addition needs to be subordinate to the main structure. So whatever makes it subordinate to, be it smaller scale, height, mass, whatever. I think that's the key word, is it needs to be subordinate.
Yeah, I want to emphasize it's subordinate, because somewhere in all this text, I saw something that said addition should be smaller. And I don't know if it was,
Here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in this,
Yeah.
it says in 4.2, 12A, it says smaller, and that's not necessary. Like I said, those are subjective terms. So I think if you just say that sentence that they should be subordinate, that should cover it.
because
And get rid of whatever smaller scale, appropriate, or similar measures, whatever that is.
yeah, when I went to that smaller, I went right to the Secretary of Interior standards. And it's very clear that they avoid smaller. And in fact, they say, they do say in the not recommended, constructing a new addition that is as large or larger than the historic building, which visually overwhelms. So that's in the not recommended. And then on the recommended side, if you wanted to add teeth, you could say ensuring that the addition is subordinate and secondary. So
Yep.
I think in the past we had subordinate, and I think there have been some reactions to some of the additions. So if you wanted to add some teeth, I mean, there's great language on this part of the last 2 parts of this section of the, you'll know where to find it. It's a
Sure.
new exterior additions to historic buildings and related new construction.
Yeah, I agree. I would add secondary too, subordinate and
Okay.
secondary.
No, I like that. That's good, because we do struggle. I know we struggle with that sometimes. So, okay.
Okay. 44. 45.
Hold on, wait. I did have something on 44. Sorry, I was slow.
Okay, that's okay.
Under 44, let's see. Oh, it was under H. In my opinion, you should delete the second part of that sentence. After the windows should be smaller than the original building windows. That's not necessarily, like, I don't think that always has to be the case. I think you can design a very good new addition or rehabilitation with windows of varying sizes. So in my opinion, you don't need that. That shouldn't be a restriction.
I would agree. In fact, sometimes a way to tie a building that's slightly more contemporary or more current with an older building is perhaps to repeat the size of the openings. You might trim them differently, but you repeat the opening size. You don't necessarily make them smaller. So I think there are plenty of good reasons to modify that.
Yeah, so I would delete the second half.
Everyone agree with that?
And likewise, for I don't know that it's necessary to say you have to avoid full stone additions. I mean, leave it up to the architect to design it. It's very possible that could work depending on the building material of whatever the main building is. As long as we've said it's supposed to be subordinate and secondary to, I don't know that the material of stone would make a difference.
That one has been there for a long time, just so you know. That's a guideline that's been around from, I think, the original. I'm not arguing for or against it.
I personally just think it's too specific and you should give the architect a little bit of leeway to decide what looks best. But
What do the rest of you think about that?
it's not too big of a deal as far as
I could go with Amy on that. Just because it's old, it doesn't mean that it has to be there.
Okay. No, I agree.
Sean, Gary?
I think creative liberty is always a little better inside the lines, right?
Inside the line.
One less regulation, people will appreciate it.
Okay.
I guess just to clarify real quick too, back to the subordinate and secondary. So we did take some of this previous guideline and put it in the code under that siting and location. And we do talk about, where am I looking here? Under that location and scale, and we have under our general provisions, the code requires building additions to primary structures shall be subordinate to the original building in height, scale, height, and size. Would we want to add secondary to that code requirement also?
Subordinate in scale, height, and size, I don't agree with that, because you can be subordinate in a lot of ways, and but it could have a larger footprint. And I'll give you a number of reasons why the house buildings need larger footprints. One of them is financial. The cost, because this is what I do for a living, the cost of significant modifications to an older structure is more costly than building an addition. And sometimes to get the dollars out of the project, 50 High Street is a great example. Tiny little building. The only way, and we did approve something for that. It's one of those two that are for sale now. We did approve something for that, but it's going to require a larger footprint and more square footage than that building currently has to entice somebody to put the dollars in to literally reframe that from the inside, change all of the finishes, new mechanicals, all of those costs. You're not going to recoup those costs in any way in that footprint. So that is a great example of where the footprint, and they did a nice job of coming back with something that from the street was subordinate to the building, but had a larger footprint. So many of the homes, as people try to convert the homes to their expectations now, they're going to need bigger footprints, and they're going to need, sometimes that footprint may need to be bigger than the house. What worried me when I saw this language is you may be creating a have and have not situation in the district. People who own a property who are so restricted with what they can do with it compared to those who are going to build a new house. Because if you look at the new houses we've seen, and I know some of you have just seen that one, or no, you've seen two, they all have a big, large open living space. People are putting those on the back of their homes now. They all have a first floor suite, which is used in a lot of different ways. So those are things the market is requiring, and when people are renovating homes, they're adding them to their homes. But if the language is so restrictive regarding additions, I think you're going to make it hard for people to update those homes. And it's also going to hurt the value of those homes. And if I was a homeowner and wanted to sell, but then there are all these restrictions about, I think that's why I like the idea. Now I keep emphasizing the lot coverage for the buildings, because that's a way of getting everybody more in the same envelope, whether you're working with an existing structure or a new structure. That language, I'm not sure there's quite an understanding of what the implications of that really restrictive language. And if it's more like, and there are two great lines that even could be in the code under recommended and not recommended, that will give design professionals, homeowners some latitude, but still have teeth. I think you just need to be careful.
So Gary, what language are you referring to?
Well, I'm looking at, this is page 56. It's under the section of rehabilitation, new exterior additions to historic buildings and related new construction. And
okay,
under the recommended section, I know people are tired. It says, ensuring that the addition is subordinate and secondary to the historic building and is compatible. And so it has these things about massing scale materials, relationship to solid voids and color. And then on the not recommended said, and this is where those who are worried about the size, constructing a new addition that is as large or as larger than the historic building, then this is what not to do, which visually overwhelms, resulting in a diminution of or loss of its historic character.
So what does, so if we use the word subordinate, I think we need to define that, because if it's not defined in the zoning code, it goes to the common usage as defined in the dictionary. And a dictionary, I'm looking here, the dictionary definition of subordinate doesn't apply to the usage that we're using. So I think it's a term of art in historic preservation that we need to define. And if it's not a function of size and scale, then what is it? And
it doesn't visually overwhelm.
Well, the dictionary definition, if you use subordinate as an adjective, is lower in rank or position. So,
right.
I mean, it's,
I don't know what that means from a design perspective.
and it's also defined as a verb as treat or regard as of lesser importance.
Right.
So that's in the Secretary of Interior standards, which he's referencing. The principle, the original building has to be the primary importance, the primary focal point. Anything else added to it has to be a lesser focal point. Low,
even though it could be just as large as.
Correct.
Yeah.
And does that, my question is, would that provide this board with guidance? That it would need on a case by case.
In my opinion, it does, because like I said, nothing in here isn't already said in the Secretary of Interior standard. Like, we're not reinventing the wheel. This is stuff that has been around at least the 25 years I've been doing it. And it gets applied to historic districts across the country on a daily basis.
Okay, I understand. I just want to make sure that this board and future board members would be able to read this language and understand what it means.
I think so.
I think that's a fair question, because I was thinking about this, and people could look at our current standards and the result and say, what's wrong? And Kathy, your proposal about having more like brief education or brief seminars, for those of us who are in the middle of this all the time, we understand what it means. But there are ways that we could build a little bit more awareness of what that means for, say, the people who don't deal with this every day. And so I think there's a way that we could provide more continuity across different boards through the training and your proposal.
Okay.
Because certainly for me,
you could add a definition of subordinate. I mean, you can add a definition of that.
Right.
And take it from the language the Secretary of Interior uses.
Yeah. And that's my point. I think we do. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at the dictionary and it's saying thing like lesser rank, which isn't really a design concept. So we need to be clear.
Yeah,
and again, I want to be clear for people in the future who don't necessarily have the same training.
I would pull it from the definitions that Gary was just reading. Just pull, if you go to the Secretary of Interior guidelines, standards for rehabilitation.
Right. No, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
And pull it from there.
Yeah.
Because for me, we'd need some, I mean, for me, I agree with Greg. People will start to interpret that capriciously, right? Okay, I think that's not or is. So, I mean, if there's some structure on subordinate or lesser or whatever it is, I think then we could be consistent.
Right. And I think a definition from the Secretary of Interior's document is easy to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Good discussion.
Yeah. These are important pieces, so I understand people are tired, but thank you for having me in. Okay, 45.
Hey, folks. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to leave soon. I have an early work morning tomorrow. I don't know if you want to continue without me, that's fine, or I can come back for a later time. But yeah, my day starts plenty early tomorrow on the pay scale.
Jenny, from a procedural standpoint, can Frank drop off and we continue?
We can do that. We have quorum, but that's up to you all.
I say from my standpoint, I only have comments.
Yeah, we're almost
comments on the new construction, and then I'm done. So like 2 pages, and then you're done hearing from me.
Yeah.
So Frank,
and I didn't have any comments actually, so I don't.
Frank, if you need to drop off, go ahead. We still have a quorum. Otherwise, we're going to continue through.
Perfect.
All
And if
right.
you had any other comments too, you can always submit those to me and
I
then we
actually
can
got
convey
through 'em,
that.
yeah, I was just waiting for others. Perfect.
Okay.
All right, thank you, folks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We're on new construction, page 48.
Yeah, so I just have a couple quick comments. So we should change the word adjacent to surrounding like you did in the code.
Ah, good catch.
And then also,
Where is
so on
that?
5.2C, I think that would be clear if we reworded it to say the building should be sited with a total lot coverage similar to surrounding properties.
I'm sorry, Amy, I was back on the last one. Did you say that again? Where are you?
Okay, so 5.2C is a little awkward the way it's written. And I would just, you could flop the words around and just say the building should be sited with a total lot coverage similar to surrounding properties.
That's much clearer.
It says the same thing, and to me, it just is clear.
I
Let
agree.
me
And
ask,
I apologize for re-editing something you've already edited a gazillion
Okay.
times.
That's a new something, so that's okay. That's good.
Okay.
not to belabor, let me ask a question of intent, because the drawings suggest continuity of street wall, which is definitely desirable when I look at the drawing below it, 5.1, and you're showing the infill site and the diagram of that building, it looks like one of the goals is to show we value continuity of street wall. And so that is a little different intent. Maybe it's a bit more specific intent. And I had a feeling, because I had a question about the way that's worded as well, but I wasn't sure what the intent when I looked at the diagram. So we're interpreting it a little bit differently. Well, who's responsible for the diagram?
Uh,
Greg?
I mean, I guess neither one of us developed the diagram, so I guess I'm ultimately responsible since I'm in charge. So we want those to jive appropriately, to your point. So I guess maybe I'm going to use Greg's tactic again of what do you all think we should do differently in order to make them align better, I guess.
Well, I think both the intents are good. I mean, I think the intent of similar lot coverage and development patterns, but maybe that's the term to use. Lot coverage and development pattern is broad enough that it covers trying to establish continuity of the street wall with the adjacent site.
Yeah, I'm all for making it as broad as possible, honestly, because I think from the years of doing the Bridge Street Code, and I know I've beat you up a lot on Jenny on that. I'm sorry.
All good.
I just think giving too specific, it restricts the creativity of the designers and the architects, and then we end up with everything looking exactly the same, which isn't what we always want.
Right.
You know, they look at this picture and they say, this picture right here, that's what I'm going to do because I know that is allowed, and then they don't want to vary any further. And so, as Jenny knows, in my opinion,
it is hard, right? It's a
in
fine
my
line
opinion,
for
less
sure.
is more. You know, I don't.
Well,
So Amy, are you saying we should take the picture out? Because the statement is very vague.
Yeah, I've always thought the pictures should be gone because it drives less creativity, but I lost that battle years ago. So I understand why we're putting them there. But I just, if it's tough, you put them there, and again, you have the designers who that's what they're going to build because it's there, they see it, I know it's right, then I can get that approved, and we don't get the variation and the creativity that we could get.
Yeah, I agree. And we had a lot of discussion when developing these graphics to make sure that we're trying to show a specific item and making sure that the other things included in this don't then contradict what either the code would allow or the guidelines would then also be promoting. So I mean, I definitely get both of your points on making sure this is getting there. I think part of including the graphics is not everybody always understands our intent. So showing
Yeah.
it in pictures is helpful sometimes.
Yeah, I just think whenever possible, when you put these graphics, they should be labeled as suggestions or possibilities or
Some caveats. Okay.
Yeah, I
just
think that's a good
give them
idea.
leeway to deviate slightly from the figure.
Or just
Yeah,
example.
I take your point. And this is something that people struggle with zoning codes all the time, is people like to see the graphics because they like
Yep.
to see some visual representation. But you're right. Once you see the graphic, it's like, okay, I'm the designer. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Because they said it's okay.
So yeah, I apologize, Greg. Jenny's used to me beating up her code after
Oh, that's
7
okay.
years. So
That's why you're
It
here.
makes us all better to have everybody looking at it. So I appreciate it.
That's why you're here.
sorry, you're the new person getting beat up.
Well, that's okay. I didn't do the drawing, so you can beat me up on that.
All right, are we ready to, do you guys know what you need to do on 48? Maybe just put it,
Let's take another
Sean?
look at it and see. Yeah.
No, for me, it's good. I think less is more. I think I agree with that. I mean, giving people, it's just easier to, or it's better for creativity,
okay.
less restrictive.
Gary, you okay?
Yes, I'm okay.
Okay, all right, great.
It-
Anything on 49?
There's only just because I just read it, there's one too many and in A, 5.3A. You can take the and out of form, mass, lot coverage,
added-
and in purport. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
added something to your list and forgot to
yeah.
replace the first and.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, 50? 51?
Under 51, 5.8C, that was added. I'm not quite sure what you're trying to say there. And I definitely don't know how you would determine if opened end versus closed end awning is historically based.
I wondered about that.
I don't know that you're like pulling up photos and seeing what kind of awning it used to have or what you're doing.
Okay, say that again. 5.8, which one?
5.8C. I have no idea what you're trying to regulate there or what you're trying to suggest.
I think that's a holdover too, to be
I think
honest.
it
I
is.
think that came from the I don't know, maybe that came from the Bridge Street Code. Okay.
I would delete it because I don't know what it means and it doesn't seem to add anything as far as I'm concerned. It
Okay.
seems confusing, but
I like deleting.
It's not clear, yeah.
Okay. All right,
and then the only other thing I had on that page was 5.11D. It's talking about energy generating devices. I'm not sure what all that encompasses. I mean, it mentions solar collectors. Sean earlier had mentioned solar panels.
Like wind, probably too. Maybe.
So is that like a huge issue that people want to put wind turbines and solar panels on the street front? I mean, I just like, it seems odd to me.
Well, we have had people that wanted solar panels on their front elevation and not wanting that on the street, that the board had a lot of discussion about requiring those to be on the rear or the side. So I think that was making sure
Okay.
you're not on the principal. We did have somebody actually, now that I'm,
yeah, okay.
and skylights maybe too. That's not what this is including,
Yeah.
but I mean,
Okay.
that was also discussed. We want that on the primary frontage.
That's fine. You can leave it. You do need a comma after the word collectors. But
Okay. Now we're into site design, page 54.
my only thing there, like you're talking about when you talk about decks and patios, you say that you can't have them under, it said it should be on the rear or side, but all through the commercial district there are patios in front of restaurants.
Good point.
So I
We'll clarify because that, yeah.
This is
that's-
talking about residential specifically.
Does it say that?
It's
It does
no,
say
it's
that.
both commercial. It's no.
it
To
In
says
both
the
the-
guideline,
under applicability 6.0, it says both residential and commercial
Commercial,
properties.
yep.
Yep.
But 6.4A says decks and patios on residential properties should be limited.
Oh, okay.
Or rear.
Okay.
Okay. 55. All right. Moving to chapter 7, signs. Anything on 58 or 59?
And I think, do we even need to do signs over again? I mean, it's covered in the code pretty extensively, but
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to have it. As long as it,
yeah, we just need them. It's just the only reason being it's another place when we change something in the code, and when we change something, so we have to make sure we change it here. So
Are you suggesting not having signs addressed in the guidelines at all?
well, no, I'm saying I don't see anything different in the guidelines that isn't already in the code. I mean, but it, besides a couple pretty pictures, I mean, if you want to leave it in, that's totally fine with me, as long as it matches the code or whatever. Just,
Yeah, and I think we would want to make sure, because that's our current problem is the guidelines reference code requirements. So making sure that that doesn't happen again.
yeah, so it's just one more area that you have to make sure matches. And
Okay.
it doesn't, to me, I don't know that it says anything that isn't in the code, but
Yeah, Jenny, I remember having a conversation about that, but it's been so long ago, I don't remember what it was, tell you the truth. As to
Okay,
why
well, we can look at, we'll double check that again. And I don't think there are that many instances in the guidelines that reference the code. It's really more about the character piece of this. So
yeah, it's fine. I didn't have any.
That's a good comment though.
yeah. Any public comments, Jenny?
Check here. I didn't hear any more pinging, but sure. Nope, I don't have any additional public comments at this point.
Wow, thank you, everybody.
Great comments and
Optimistic you're
discussion.
gonna get through this.
Yeah, thank you for such a careful read, everyone.
So Jenny, up to you on next steps.
So based, I think, on the comments, again, things that we can definitely take care of and look through. And we really wanted to sort of see what the level of comments were today on how to proceed. I think ultimately we do want to have another sort of public input session, but I think at this point, given the number of comments and the depth of where our discussion was, I think I'd like to come back to you all with a revised version before we would do that. Not that it wouldn't be available for people to review and provide comment, but I think because there are some significant changes here, I'd want to make sure that we're really getting to your point before we would take that to them in a more formal input kind of manner.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, given your current agendas, I think it's really hard. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to do this on a regular meeting night. So it seems like trying to do another special meeting, maybe in July, towards the end of July, would give us enough time to do that. I'm wondering, we were targeting having a special meeting when we, again, as an option, like July 29th. Which would be like back-to-back weeks of you meeting, on a Wednesday. I don't know. I guess I should check the city calendar to make sure that.
I'd rather do that than have an ultra long meeting.
Yeah, it sort of requires a different way of thinking than your normal case review.
So
July 29th, is that what you said?
That is what I threw out there. Yes, I'm just making sure I don't have any issues.
Sean?
It's fine. It's good for me.
Gary?
No vacations this summer. That's fine.
Yeah, tell me about it.
We're having a staycation.
Yeah, I can make it work.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, let's and we can discuss again as we get closer to that date to make sure that works for us. Does that work for you, Greg, I guess?
It does, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so let's go with that as our at least tentative date to sort of target, and have that gives us a good goal to make sure everything gets addressed, and we give you enough time to review it too. I like for you to have a little extra time to look at it and make sure.
Okay.
So let me clarify, for this next round that you see, I think what we would do is go ahead and accept all the changes that you were fine with. What you would see now is a new set of track changes, just addressing issues discussed tonight, right?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Greg. I was thinking something similar. So, okay, great. So then we'll do that special meeting. Hopefully that is satisfactory to you all, or again, maybe there's some minor tweaks, but then we could then go forward and do some more just double checking our public input and making sure that everybody's on board with that. And then we would take it through the process and that requires ARB recommendation to Planning Commission, who makes a recommendation to council. So, and then 2 readings at council. So that, I think that works. And we'll make sure in the next go around that we provide the definitions part. Again, those are referenced in our overall code, but that would be helpful for you all to have that. So I'll make sure that that's included as well, just because we'll be adding some too. So that would be beneficial to show that. But I'm trying to think if there was something else, but that will be our plan then. Again, really hoping to keep this moving.
So our recommendation goes to P and Z, not directly to council.
Correct. The way the code is set up, Planning Commission has a step in there as the recommending body to council.
I didn't realize we were subordinate to them.
Yes, in this, with code changes.
Well, we can't send code directly. The way that the code is written is all code recommendations come from planning and zoning to council.
Okay, right.
They don't approve, planning and zoning doesn't approve it. They just make the recommendation. That's the only way to get code changed in the city.
Okay. So they could change what our recommendation is.
But can't we write, if they change some things, can't we write another opinion to the council that accompanies that? And if we do find things that we don't agree with?
We've not had that, and they've really been very deferential to what you're all recommending. So, I mean, I think in our we could cross that bridge when we come to it, I guess, in terms of procedure.
Well, in any planning report, when you send the code to council, it will come with a planning report, which has the history. So it would have ARB's recommendations in there. So they would know what we recommended. And I mean, if there was a difference, you could.
And we would, especially if it was something
what was
dramatically different, we would definitely, like, if you wanted to recommend something very particular and Planning Commission didn't agree with that, we would point that out for discussion. So I mean,
okay, thank you.
We'd be very clear about that. So
thank you. Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Just one last thing, I mean, is it possible to print it? I mean, I actually like working from this printed copy, except there's there's 150 pages. I mean, is there a way that we could, it's just easier to keep notes and keep track?
I agree, because I was trying to take copious notes of the edits and on a piece of paper, and that's really not working very well for me either. So yes, I think for this next go around, because I think that would also be more of a final version, maybe that would be the best way to do that. So
yeah, I don't want to kill a bunch of trees, but if I try to do it on my computer, it's
we'll double-side it. We'll try to minimize the trees. So.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, we're still live, so let me, when we're done here, and again, I don't want to interrupt if you have any other business. I don't think I have any other communication-wise. We are working through changes to the temporary sign ordinance and property maintenance and have some target dates for that. We're still making our edits to that, so I don't want to put anything out there just yet. But I think in the end, for those 2 amendments, at this point, given everybody's feedback, I think we will just come directly to each board for the next steps of each of those to allow you all to have a little bit more individualized comments. Now that we have some general direction for those 2 code amendments,
okay,
come forward with that.
Thank you.
But otherwise, no. And then you should be getting packets, digital materials on Friday for this next meeting. So
sounds good.
That's all I have. Okay, so we're be adjourned, then I'll stop the live stream.
We're adjourned.
Okay.